Well, great. Thanks everyone for coming. Welcome. PMT members, please put yourselves on camera for just a minute. Guess you're welcome to do so, of course. Um, but I'm Dave Halsing. I'm the Executive Project Manager for the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project. This is our semi-regular Stakeholder Forum meeting. We last did one of these in September or October of 2021, so about a year and a half, which is pretty good. We're going to be doing a lot of different things today. As you can see here on the agenda, we're going to introduce a couple of our key new team members. We'll give you an update on the restoration project as a whole, sort of lay out what we're doing for those that are new either to the forum or new from the interested public. Want to explain what we're doing and why, and then we'll give more location-specific updates at the National Wildlife Refuge and at Eden Landing. There's a short break in between those. We will have some presentations on our collaborations with some external projects that overlap with our spatially and thematically. Those are really important. We'll go over science program updates and talk a little bit about our funding status. And then we will have an official adjournment, but the agenda is really packed today. And so we want to make sure that we provide opportunities for added questions, more follow-up, more discussion of things. So we will stay on, at least a core group of the project management team will stay on for as long after the meeting ends as would be appropriate to answer any questions. So that is the time. If we have to cut off the Q&A period during any of the blocks of the different agenda, that is what we'll be doing at the end. So hopefully that works for everyone. Before we get into that, I want to turn it over to our engagement outreach coordinator, Ariel Embruster, who is going to talk about kind of the logistics and the tech support of the day, just in case anyone is new to Zoom, which seems hard to believe at this point, but might still be the case. So, Ariel, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So the approach we'll be taking today, those of you who've been at our Stakeholder Forum meetings over the years are familiar with this. We will present on a topic and then have discussion Q&A on that topic before moving on to the next topic. When we have open it up for folks, we're going to turn to forum members first, since you all represent larger constituencies, and then we'll hear from the public and then shift to the next topic. And as Dave said, if topics get a little more intricate, we can get back to them at the end of the meeting. So you can ask questions or provide comments two ways, either verbally or writing in chat. And for the next slide, we assume most of you all know these, but just in case, for raising your hand, you can see here how to click to raise your hand. You can always try a physical wave, but with a lot of you here, we can't see all of you, so we might miss that. If you're joining on the phone, you can dial *9. And next slide. So please remain on mute until it's your turn. And you can see where the mute button is. If you're on the phone, you'd be dialing *6 to mute and unmute. Next slide. There's the chat for writing in your questions and comments, and we will be keeping the chat, so and memorializing any of your written comments. And I am your tech support person, so I'm going to type my phone in here now in the chat for you, but you can see it on the screen, 510-630-4711. Or you can contact me in chat if you are on Zoom. And reminder, the meeting's being recorded. We also have closed captions on if you would like to use that to make sure you're catching everything. Last, if you are on the meeting but not on your mailing list, you can add your name and email address in the chat and we'll add you to our mailing list. If you would prefer, you can private chat me if you want to keep it private. And I'll turn it back to Dave.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, the project management team is a large group. It's made up of representatives from quite a large number of organizations, but we do have two new team members who are in particularly important roles as land managers. So I wanted to give them an opportunity to step back and introduce themselves to the forum group. So Anne and then Carly, please take a moment or two and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everybody. My name is Ann Spainhauer. I am the refuge manager for Don Edwards, San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I am an aquatic biologist by training with a long history of particular emphasis on threatened and endangered species that are aquatic, as well as the tools and regulations of the ESA that allow for listing, recovery, and promoting conservation. I'm super excited to be part of this team, which has now been 11 months. I'm almost completed my full year, a full year, and it's been a steep learning curve, but it's been great meeting so many of you and being part of this neat project.
All right. And there's Carly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carly White. I'm with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I've been with the department for about 7 years, but I've been working here. Uh-oh, I'm frozen. Did I unfreeze for all of you?
We missed you, but now we can hear you again, Carly.
Yep.
Okay. Of course, it works perfectly until I start speaking. Okay, I'll
Happens
just
all
start
the
from
time. We heard 7 years at the department, I think was the last thing we heard.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, 7 years of the department. I've been
Rats. And she's dropped entirely. We will give Carly time at the beginning of the Eden Landing update session. Carly's been doing a fabulous job. She has a really tough row ahead of her. I had to live with being called the new John Bourgeois for 2 years after I stepped into the role that I have now. Carly has to follow up of 20 years of John Krause at Eden Landing. So that she's got an even bigger set of shoes to fill, perhaps, or a longer term set of shoes to fill. So whenever Carly joins back in, we'll fill her in on the plan to just introduce herself at the beginning of that. So to move on, as came up during our little welcome session, if those of you were there, this is our 20th year. The salt pillons were acquired from Cargill in 2003. So it's 20 years of science-guided restoration and flood protection and public access management. A lot of that has come out of meetings like this. In the early days of the project, the Stakeholder Forum and its various working groups were absolutely essential to developing and laying out the long-term vision for the restoration project as a whole, and sort of figuring out the means and methods by which we were going to go about selecting and designing things, about conducting a science program to help study and inform, to understand the results of previous actions and use those to inform our decisions going forward. The forum exists so that our neighbors, our interest groups, landowners, not necessarily regulators, although they're always welcome to attend, but the regulators have their own group that we work with them on. The Stakeholder Forum was intended to be about those who were sort of most directly affected by, or whose input and influence into the project was central to what we were doing. And we would have these meetings so that they could not only hear directly from us and ask questions directly of us, but also hear each other's inputs and questions and issues. And so we've tried. Yeah.
Can we just check to make sure? We've gotten a notice that folks are having trouble seeing the screen, at least one person. I just wanted to make sure, everybody else can see the screen?
Can you all see that?
I can see it.
Great.
I see it.
Okay. Thanks so much. Sorry about that.
So it's maybe just someone with a little lag.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
see it too.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. So thank you for pointing that out, Ariel. It's hard for me to keep an eye on the chat as well as everything else. So yeah, please do call things like that to my attention. So yeah, I think sometimes there's just a little lag on Zoom. So it seems like most people are okay now. So we will continue. The restoration project has had 3 main goals the whole time, and we are still pursuing these goals. We want to provide habitat restoration, flood risk management, and public access. So in terms of habitat restoration, we have to provide a number of different habitats, partly marsh, but mostly marsh, in fact. But we also need to keep and enhance some pond habitats for the kinds of wildlife that use those. We provide flood risk management features, at the very least, making sure that what we do retains the existing levels of flood protection that these old salt pond berms have historically provided, but wherever possible, we work with local flood control districts and public agencies to build in features of their projects or to incorporate their issues and needs into our designs or our construction, and actually make some improvements. And the third goal is public access and recreation, with the idea that we want people to be in close contact with the bay. We want people to be out and about. It's healthy for them. It's healthy for communities. But importantly, that has to be wildlife compatible. So it tends to be low impact things like, trails and kayak launches, viewing areas, things for non-motorized recreation. So that fits very much with the mission of our landowning agencies and with the restoration project as a whole. So the project takes place on 3 pond complexes owned by our 2 landowners. CDFW's Eden Landing Ecological Reserve is up here in blue. That is what Carly White is the new main manager of. And down here in green, in 2 groups, the Alviso ponds are these green ones here, and over here in San Mateo County, are the Ravenswood ponds. Those are both part of the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge. The refuge is larger than those ponds, but those other ponds and other areas are not part of the restoration project. And so we're going to get into updates on all of those specific locations earlier as we go. But very quickly, our project history: 20 years ago, 15,000 acres were acquired from Cargill, a combination of purchase and donation. Public and private funds were used for the purchase part of that. Cargill remains a good partner to this day, and we're happy for their collaboration. At that time, a visioning process began for the project, wherein the sort of what the process and steps of selecting and choosing and designing and implementing different restoration actions would be. And one of the most critical questions was asked during our welcome and sort of informal hangout session about how we do the mix of marsh and ponds, and that's going to come up again and again throughout this talk. But essentially, we have to make sure that we provide a very careful balance on that. And so the way that was envisioned was by thinking about the amount of marsh over time. All right, so amount of marsh on the y-axis, time on x, and implementing the project in stages and phases, and stopping somewhere between a 50-50 mix, 50% marsh, 50% ponds, and at the high end up to a 90% percentage of tidal marsh relative to 10% ponds. And we wouldn't get there all at once. We would do it in steps and kind of see how everything's responding, and then make decisions about where we stop on those. So in the first phase of the project, the first step up that ladder, or the restoration staircase, as we sometimes call it, 3,000 acres of tidal marsh and muted tidal marsh were restored, 700 acres of managed ponds. And those restored ponds that are now forming marshes are working. In less than a decade, we are getting healthy, mature marsh establishing in a lot of places. Endangered wildlife is moving back in, and that's been really great to see. We've also added 7 miles of new trails, a handful of new viewing platforms, and a kayak launch, some boardwalk trails, and those are quite a benefit to the local area. And so just revisiting this staircase, phase 1 that I just described got us about a quarter of the way up that ladder. Phase 2, when we finish our phase 2 projects, we're going to be just a little bit shy of 50% tidal marsh and 50% managed ponds. But we also have some outside collaborative projects that we're going to talk about at the end of the session. And when those are implemented, we're going to be just a little bit over 50%. So we'll revisit this point closer to the end of the meeting. But I kind of wanted to point that out here just as a thing to sort of focus your attention on going forward, is where we are on that staircase. Phase 2 project sites are all of the areas in the circles. The large red circle is Southern Eden Landing. That is being planned and permitted right now. And then phase 2 on the refuge is actually at 4 different locations. We're going to cover all of these one by one, starting on the east and moving across the South Bay. And you'll hear about all those and what we're doing at each of those. So to begin, phase 2 at the refuge. These are those 4 groups: Ravenswood in San Mateo County, the Alviso Mountain View ponds, which are right next to Mountain View Shoreline Park, the Alviso A8 ponds, which are in the very far South Bay next to Alviso, but actually technically in sort of at the edge of Sunnyvale and San Jose, and the Alviso Island ponds. So to start that off, I believe we have Rachel Turris from the National Wildlife all set up and ready to go.
All right, thanks, Dave. So we are going to start off with the island ponds. So back in 2006, as part of phase 1, we restored the island ponds, which is this collective of 3 islands here, A21, A20, and A19. Dave, next. And so we breached these ponds onto Coyote Creek. Next. And so this is a picture of A21, which is our pond on the west side of the islands. And we can see it's a fully developed marsh. Next. But on the eastern side, A19 has not been as quick to develop. And so it's still mostly mudflat. Next. And so as part of phase 2, we implemented an enhancement to the island ponds. And this one was to really jumpstart the ponds to revegetate faster with some breaches along mud slough on the top with the green arrows, to lower the levee to increase more flow into A19, and to remove levees between A19 and A20, both for marsh connectivity as well as fish connectivity. Next. But what we found when we were working was a large number of small mammal nests in the areas that we were clearing in preparation for this work. And so we went out and we adaptively managed the project by reducing the elements while still accomplishing our project goals. So we still did do the breaching along mud slough. We did some levee lowering and some removal, but much less impacts to the site. Next. We completed the work in early 2022. And if you want to learn more about the small mammal nests that we found and that activity, I encourage you to look at the South Bay website, our project website here. We did a presentation during the Science Symposium, and there's a link to our live presentation there. So I encourage you to check it out. And next, we're going to go to Anne for Pond A8.
And I will ask maybe that Ariel could drop that link into the chat directly. Thanks so much. And, you know, we had to do a lot of veg clearing in order to do that construction. That vegetation is reestablishing very quickly. It was mostly back less than a year later, so kind of as intended. So with that, I will move along to Ann Spainhauer.
Awesome. Thanks for allowing me to talk about A8. So we have been operating, the Fish and Wildlife has been operating A8 pond as muted tidal for about a decade. And we've been continuing to stockpile materials there. And this year we'll begin the building of an ecotone, which is the transition zone between the water and the upland terrestrial habitat. Next slide, please, Dave.
Yep.
This is a conceptual drawing of what an ecotone looks like. This transition zone is by and large characterized by the tidal fluctuation. And when that's the primary factor that influences the terrestrial community composition. So as you start lower in the shallow areas, you have a subzone that's subtidal. And as you move up the bank, which gradually increases, you go from tidal mudflat, low marsh, and middle and high marsh until you reach the levee crest. And through along this area, we are encouraging different types of communities, including the habitat for our endangered species, the Ridgway's rail, and the salt marsh harvest mouse. The great thing about these ecotones is they not only create a lot of space for biota and special plants, like it also provides the salt marsh harvest mouse with its primary food source, but these ecotones can help by reducing coastal erosion, They are both a source of erosion and a deposition zone, depending on a number of variables. The plants do tend to trap sediment, and they can buffer the shoreline areas from flooding and also act as a sink for pollutants. So they're really important parts of the project, and one of the primary areas of habitat, as I said, for the endangered species. Next slide, please. So on Pond A8, we are actually going to have 2 habitat transition zones, and you can see these in the southern, where Dave's got the red dots on the west and the east side of the pond, and we're leaving that gap in the middle for the potential for future creek connections, which you're going to hear about later. So this construction is beginning this year, and we're looking forward to seeing A8 continue to be restored. And I think also in this later today, we're going to hear a little bit about VTA tunnel muck too, and maybe how it will be used to assist ponds like A8.
Nice.
Thanks.
Well, yeah. So thanks for that. Yeah, all the material is in place. It's been tested and screened from offsite excavation projects. It's all there. It's ready to be graded out. It took several years, but it worked, and we are grateful to our partners in doing all of that work. The next pond group that you'll hear about is from Steve Carroll of Ducks Unlimited, who's our one of the most long-term members of our design team on this project. So Steve, take it away.
You calling me old?
No, you just got started early.
We were the same age, by the way. Almost
I know.
your birthday. Thank you. So Mountain View Ponds abuts the city of Mountain View. It's part of the old Cargill Ponds that transferred to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's part of the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge. Consists of 2 ponds, Pond A1 on the left, Pond A2W on the right. Total of they're about 710 acres. This is going to convert these 2 ponds to tidal wetlands through breaches on the eastern and western edges of each of the ponds. There's the Stevens Creek tidal creek that's on the east side of A2W, and then you have the Mountain View Slough that separates Pond A1 from Pond A2, and then Charleston Slough on the west side. And so we're going to connect these ponds to those adjacent sloughs, which then will connect to San Francisco Bay, which is a very shallow part of the bay in this region. The southern part of the site abuts the city of Mountain View and the Shoreline Park, which is primarily closed landfill. And there's also the Coast Casey Forebay levee on the far west side edge. That's a FEMA flood control levee, and we're coordinating with the city on improving the flood protection in that area. The bottom areas adjacent to the landfill are both going to have habitat transition zones constructed through the import of material, offsite material, just as Ann had just described. This material is coming from regional excavations for commercial development. And so we are getting this material imported and placed pretty much free of cost, which means that we're insisting on good quality material and we're getting it for free. So that means the time to bring it in is like I'd say extensive. You know, we don't have control of it. We're at the whim of the construction industry. But we are going to bring in somewhere around 360,000 cubic yards in order to construct these 2 habitat transition zones. And we're also going to improve some of the existing levees to construct public access features and also maintain a levee connection between Charleston Slough and Pond A1. On where Dave's pointing right now, there's going to be a small new spur trail going out to an overlook that's about 1/10 of a mile long. The Bay Trail actually spans the southern border of both of these ponds. So we're going to connect to the Bay Trail with that small spur trail. And then we're also going to have another public access trail going up the eastern side of A2W to an overlook that's out on the bayfront, and that's about 1.2 miles in length. The breaches, in order to maintain that trail, are going to be spanned with concrete bridges, and we're going to armor those two breaches so that they don't erode and take out the levee. The other breaches are going to be just levee breaches, and we're going to allow those to erode and degrade as they need to in order to accommodate the restoration's future conditions. You'll note that A2W, there's some power lines that span from the southern portion up to the northwestern portion. PG&E is currently now making improvements to those transition towers, and that's going to be to accommodate the future sea level conditions that we'll have in the ponds. Next slide, please, I think. This is kind of a summary of where we're at today. We have been importing material for the habitat transition zone. We brought in basically about 16% of what we need for both ponds. We're about 55,000 yards that have been placed into A2W. A1 has not seen any material or any work to date. Right now, we're currently working on A2W. We'll transition over most likely when that's complete. PG&E is still working on the levee improvements, and they will be done this summer. And we have agreements in place with the city for this restoration effort, and also providing some additional flood protection and erosion protection on city property. We expect it's going to be another 2 or 3 years before the projects are complete. We can't breach these, of course, until all the elements are in place. So we're working on managed ponds right now. And then once we have all the restoration elements done, we will breach these and open them up to the tides. At that, I think I'm going to turn it back to you, Dave.
Yeah, well, that's great. We are actually a little ahead of schedule, and we have Ravenswood still to talk about, but I thought maybe I'd pause here and see if there's any questions on those first 3 pond groups or any discussion. We can do a few minutes on that, and then we will still have time for Chris Barr and Jesse Olson to present on the work going on at Ravenswood. I see a few hands here, so I will start with I'll start with the first one on my screen. Eric Larkin, then Arthur, and then Dean Stanford.
Yes, Steve, I had a question regarding the levee breaches on Stevens Creek, Wisman Slough. At high tide, how much flow do you expect? Do you anticipate it to be similar to the notch on pond A8? I'm asking because we go kayaking in that area sometimes, and if it's hazardous, I need to keep the club away from it.
Well, at height, I would have to be honest, I need to go back and look. If you're looking for velocities, go back and look at our hydrodynamic model. We did look at all that, and I'd be happy to share that information with you. I'm sure it might even be on the South Bay Salt Pond website. I'm not sure if that's true or not.
It probably is.
Yeah.
Okay.
It might take some digging.
Yeah, it might take some digging, but happy to get back to you on that.
I would say that, like, just by comparison, Eric, that pond is the AA group together near the notch are 1,400 acres, and a little bit deeper. Pond A2W is 435 acres, and will have more openings in it. So I would not expect there's more places for the water to go, so it would be more like a delta, and so you should expect a lower velocity at any individual point of entry into those ponds, because there's more holes and a smaller volume of water internally, but that's not the exact answer you need.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Arthur, please go ahead. You'll need to unmute yourself though.
Yeah, no problem. This is a fast one. On the previous slide, I think it was the previous one, at the bottom of the bullets, it said no Charleston Slough. Just clarifying, does that mean that you're not working on Charleston Slough, or does it mean that you're eliminating Charleston Slough?
No. Yes, it means, that's a fine question. It means no work on Charleston Slough. One of the alternatives we looked at in the EIR would have included breaches between Charleston Slough and Pond A1, and for a long variety of reasons, most of which had to do with protecting steelhead, we were forced to, instead of opening holes in this levee between those two, actually building it up to keep them separated. And so as an update, this was supposed to be shorthand for, yeah, we're not doing any work there.
Great. And also, will the trail extend beyond that overlook? Because you used to be able to go out pretty far on the trail there, and you got a lot of people there with great access.
I think the trail you're thinking about might be the one that's on this
the other
side of
side.
Charleston Slough. Yeah, this side here has never been open to public access, and in fact, that levee is that levee is very low and would not be suitable for public access at all. So the trail is going to end right around here. It'll be higher in that first bit, and then after that point, it'll drop down to just what's needed to keep the hydraulic separation. But we're going to build it a little higher in the interest of making the view a little better out to that point.
Right. So the trail's on the other side. It's next to the flood control land.
Yeah, that's right. And that's still there.
Okay.
And we're not touching that. No. Good questions. Thank you. Dean Stanford and then James Monotakos.
Yeah, hi. I was going to ask the same thing about trails. I'm all about access and recreation. So I was wondering if it'd be possible to have a trail around the entire perimeter. With your free dirt, maybe you could do that. And
yeah, it's actually not possible. The goal is for those levees to break down over time and for that to form marsh, right? So we are going to maintain the trail out to about this point here, but that's because PG&E needs to have this access easement all the way out to here. And the public access trail will be a mile out to the open bay here, but it will not be a loop trail around them.
Okay. Yeah. So I read that the McIntyre Petrus Act requires, maximum feasible public access.
That's right. And feasible, has a lot of layers to it, right? That word does a lot of work in that definition. Yeah. We had to get a BCDC permit for this work under the McIntyre Petrus Act, and they issued the permits for the trail designs that you see here, with the understanding that trails are fully around these levees would not allow them to break down, which would mean not achieving the habitat restoration goals or the flood management goals. So
what I'd like to see on Pond 18, I know it's a part of this, but the breach and bridge like is being done here. So that's encouraging.
Yeah. Super expensive and difficult to do, but we are doing it. I can't speak to whether they can or not.
I was going to mention that on the Don Edwards, the Fremont side, they did a bridge with a rail car flatbed. So that might be a way to reduce cost. And I wanted to ask about e-bikes. They're getting more and more popular and getting banned in more and more places. And I've got neuropathy from GBS from the flu shot. So if I hike or just leave my feet on the ground for hours, it's really painful, and even riding bikes. So for elderly and disabled, I'd like to see e-bikes not banned on the Bay Trail and on these trails.
So yeah, it's a good point. The thing with the Bay Trail is every landowner on which the Bay Trail crosses, there are certain Bay Trail design standards, but the actual rules can differ by landowner. So the Bay Trail here is actually in the City of Mountain View Shoreline Park. It's not in the Wildlife Refuge. And so the City of Mountain View makes its own rules for what is and isn't allowed on that stretch of trail. And this trail that we're going to be adding on the eastern side will be on National Wildlife Refuge lands. And so the refuge can set its own policies about things like bicycle trails or e-bikes or pets or whatever else. And so Anne or Chris or Rachel, I don't know if any of you are able to speak to this part of the refuge, what you would consider allowing with regard to bikes or pets or any of the other kinds of questions.
Yeah, one of my ideas was you have the main trail on top of the levee and maybe e-bike trail on the side slope, the inland side, maybe. If there's conflict,
I would need to think about the design details of that. That sounds challenging.
Dave,
Go ahead, Rachel. Yeah.
I can just, so for each one of these areas, as they come online with new public access, we go through a process to see what is compatible. So the trail is compatible, and then we'll look at what is best for other regulations. So on the refuge, currently, we do allow e-bikes up to a certain speed and a certain type. At this point, we only have the option of having one trail based on the limited space that we're working in. But those are great things that when we get down to the more detailed in the future, we can look at what is appropriate for this site in particular. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, it's a good idea and a good suggestion. James, tacos.
And Dave, I might just notice I see a forum hand up from Pat Showalter
Oh,
too.
I do too. Sorry. Yeah, James, go ahead and then Pat.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm from Valley Water. We're considering the use of the free commercial soil for several of our projects. I just wanted to ask about your experience with working with the commercial dirt brokers. Where does the testing occur, and does it occur at their site or after it arrives at the restoration area, and what's been your experience? Has the soil had a pretty good record of passing the testing, or have you had any problems with unsuitable soil having not being usable?
Yeah, well, Brian Wines from the Water Board is on the conference here and can correct me if I get any of this wrong, but the way it works is the project proponents or their construction contractors or their hauling companies or their dirt brokers, whichever the specifics are in any individual case, they are the ones responsible for developing the sampling and testing plan, for doing that work, for sending it to a testing lab, for compiling the results, and then writing a report to the Water Board and to BCDC that characterizes the results of the testing and also the land use history and other risks from that location, in terms of whether it was there might be agricultural chemicals, or whether it was a site where there had been a leaking underground storage tank or anything like that, right? So characterizing the history and then the specific testing requirements, and assuming it passes all that, then they bring it to us and they place it where we tell them. And if we already have our permits in place, then they will generally be able to put it directly into its end location. And in other cases where we're not ready to build the actual project yet, they will stockpile it. And there are protocols and standards for how that stockpiling is done and delineated and flagged and separated. And I would say that it works very, very well in terms of the cost profile because we get the material for free. The risks are, everything has a downside. Risks are is we have much less control over how quickly our projects get built, right? Because we don't control the commercial development market, and we don't know how clean the material is going to be, and we don't know when it's going to be available. And sometimes developers pull the plug on a project, even though we're ready to go, right? And sometimes the material is clean enough, but the timing of their own construction doesn't work out with our needs, and so we often kind of lose that. There's work window, seasonal work window constraints. There's work in wet season constraints. There's a number of different challenges, but on balance, clearly it's worth our doing because we still do it, right? So does that answer your question, James?
Yeah, that's helpful. Just wondered, is there a uniform standard, or is it
yes?
required?
Sorry, I skipped over that part. There is, for the refuge as a whole, there is a quality assurance program plan that specifies the testing standards, protocols, requirements, and also the screening limits for a very, very large number of categories. Some naturally occurring metals, some hydrocarbons, industrial chemicals, agricultural chemicals, all that sort of thing. And so those standards are in that document, and each new landowner is welcome to use the existing quality assurance program plan, the QAP as we call it, to develop their own. And then the Water Board and BCDC would need to approve that document, of course. But generally speaking, the protocol should be the same. And I
Okay,
believe you have that quap. I think we've shared it with Carol Foster and Judy and others at Valley Water over the years.
okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure thing. Council Member Showalter and forum member, please go ahead.
Hi, I was just going to mention that at the city of Mountain View, we have a 15 miles an hour speed limit on all of our trails. And the reason we did that, and we didn't specify the kind of vehicle that you could use, is because it just seems to us that when we were thinking about it and made the ordinance, that you know, there's so many new things that come along, and we didn't feel like we could possibly identify all of them. So we just set a speed limit. And I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, that's very helpful. The sort of the reasoning behind the behind the restriction or the regulation, right, is it was about speed, and then you didn't have to decide on every single case individually. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, I'm seeing, according to our schedule, it is time to shift gears to
Dave,
Ravenswood. Yes.
I just wanted to mention to a comment that was added to the chat.
Oh, thank
Betsy
you.
Magus said, creek trails and the Bay Trail are used for commuting as well as recreation, and she hopes that we'll work with cities and the Bicycle Coalition to announce trail closures and construction.
Yep, that is a good point, and we do try to do that as like when we were beginning the import of the dirt to Pond A2W, for example, we did post on the City of Mountain View's website, on the Restoration Project's website, and on the Refuge's website about that. So we do try to do that, and we put signs up and things like that. We have flaggers and things to increase safety. So it's an important part of that. So thank
and
you
we
for
can
that
also
comment.
make a point to mention to the Bay Trail folks, because they keep those things up on
Yes.
their website too.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, all right, we will switch forward to the Ravenswood Ponds, which Chris Barr is going to speak about. Chris,
Good
take
morning,
it away.
everybody. My name is Chris Barr. I'm the Deputy Complex Manager for the San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge Complex. I'm excited to talk about our Ravenswood restoration project, which is in progress. There's 3 types of restoration happening within this area. We have the tidal restoration of Pond R4, which is about 295 acres. Within that R4, there'll be ecotone adjacent to the Bidwell Bayfront Park and along the bottom here. Also some channel enhancements within the R4 pond. Pond R3, about 270 acres, will be enhanced for Western snowy plover management. We put in some water control structures to improve water flow into the area for that. And then we have the R5, S5, which are managed ponds for water birds, similar to the adjacent pond that is on Bidwell Bayfront Park. So some new water control structures in there to help manage those ponds. With this project, we will be opening about a half mile of trail to a nice midsection viewing spot where you can see all 3 types of restoration that the South Bay Salt Pond Project is doing on the bay. And coordinating very closely with the City of Menlo Park, Bidwell Park is doing their master plan development to have a common look and feel and connection. Our trail connects to the Bay Trail, which runs along the highway and is adjacent to the recently completed Facebook pedestrian bridge, which connects the Bellhaven community to the bay. So safer access to our trails and to the park as a result of this project. Next slide. Here's a few pictures of our restoration in action. We've been talking a lot today about the beneficial reuse of dirt material, and that's been great out here and working with the City of Menlo Park on coordinating our plans to import that material to build out the ecotone. This has been key to our project. I think overall, approximately about 225,000 cubic yards is needed for the project, raising some of these habitat berms up a little higher. In some areas, it's up to 9 feet elevation, in other sections, 11 feet. of enhanced material to help us when we go forward with the breach of the R4 pond. And you can see some of the equipment in action out there, and that soft bay muds building up those habitat berms. Next slide. It's been great. You know, the Bidwell Park gets a lot of use, so folks have been able to watch this restoration in action, and encourage folks to go out there and take a look. We've created some of the ecotone area with our partners you'll hear more about that in a little bit. Their work out there involving the community. We've also the bird response to some of the work already, even though we're not completed with the project, has been great, especially over this last winter rains. Let's go to the next slide. So what have we completed so far? We've completed a lot of the in-channel work and all of the soft ground earthwork. We've installed the 4 water control structures. We've raised almost all of those habitat berms, all but 220,000 cubic yards remain to be brought into the site. We've had a little pause because of all the wet weather we've had this winter, but as soon as new material is able to come out, we'll continue that import of the remaining material. We built and planted the first habitat zone, and we'll be working to do the second habitat zones shortly. We've also partnered both in the NEPA planning and in the permitting, coordinating with the One Shoreline project, and you'll hear more about them in a little bit here. And they completed an improvement project for flood protection in the community on the Bayfront Canal and Atherton Channel. It connects up to our R5, S5 ponds, and you'll hear a little bit more of that together. So coordinating together with the city and One Shoreline to help make sure everyone's needs are taken care of in the response. And that picture I showed earlier of the bird response was the results of them finishing their project in time for those big winter storms that we had. And you'll hear more from Colin Martinero, the project manager for One Shoreline. Next slide.
Yep.
What we have left to do is to complete the remaining dirt import, finish remaining berm raising, and getting ready for the breach of the R4 pond. The R4 breach event will likely take place in late 2023. So look out for an invite for that. Our trail improvements, we'll be working with the community. We're currently engaging with the Ohlone tribe to get their input on our public use area. And we'll be opening that public use area after some community engagement in the area about mid-2024. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Jessie Olson. She's the Habitat Restoration Director for Save the Bay. She'll talk more about their work in partnering with us on the restoration.
And I haven't seen Jessie. Is she?
I'm here. I'm here.
You are here. Okay. I kept looking for you to appear, and I didn't see you yet. But please take it away, and I'm ready to advance your slides as you need.
Great. Yeah, it's a big room. Thanks so much for teeing that up, Chris. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Save the Bay's role in the work happening at Ravenswood, and in particular around the R4 pond. Chris mentioned the habitat transition zone a couple of times. Save the Bay is helping to revegetate that area. In particular, we're talking about 25 acres in total of habitat transition zone, including approximately 9 acres of an area adjacent to Bedwell Bayfront Park, and about 16 acres that we're calling the All American Canal, and that's on the southern side of the R4 pond. To complete this work, we're growing plants in our Palo Alto nursery, but we're primarily growing plants at a division bed nursery that we built on site in partnership with the West Bay Sanitary District. There's a parcel of property owned by West Bay San, just to the north of Bedwell Bayfront Park. Thank you so much for pointing it out, where we've been able to build and plant 82 division beds that have been filled with locally sourced perennial and often rhizomatous native plants that we've used to do this restoration work. So in the fall of 2021 and 2022, through 2022, we completed the first year of planting at the Bedwell levee. As we were still in peak COVID, much of that work was completed by our staff and with limited community engagement. We are really looking forward to this coming year, fall and winter, we'll be able to bring community groups out to the shoreline to help us plant the All-American Canal and hopefully include some workforce development, bringing out the Conservation Corps San Jose or other relevant community groups to help us do that work. You can go to the next slide. So what's unique for us about this site is that we have been experimenting with new outplanting methods tailored particularly to these large-scale habitat transition zone sites. The idea of incorporating farming equipment is something that was proposed to Save the Bay several years ago by Peter Bay, a local ecologist, as a means to amplify the amount of work, revegetation work we're able to do in a shorter timeline and with limited cost and limited labor. So what you see here on the left is one of our volunteers essentially watering sod material, native sod material that will then be translocated to the slope on the right here, and then disked into the slope using farming equipment. So this is a tractor with a disking mechanism that you might see as an agricultural use, but we're using it to disk in native perennial material. So this is what we did on the Bedwell Bayfront levee. This is what we intend to do on the All-American Canal levee. We have about 1 year of monitoring data looking at whether or not it's effective. We anecdotally feel like we got a good amount of native plant material out there, and we're excited to replicate that again. Go to the next slide. Okay, so what we have upcoming for Save the Bay's staff and community engagement includes invasive species removal, targeted invasive species removal at the Bedwell Bayfront levee, trying to move through that site and remove invasive plant material as it sets flower and seed. And that is an excellent activity with a lot of our community and corporate groups. You'll probably see, if you're wandering the site, some of our volunteers out there helping us do that work. In fall through spring of 2024, we intend to start outplanting and revegetating the All-American Canal. That work is sequenced, starting with that mechanized revegetation using farming equipment, followed by a native annual seed mix, and then followed by community engagement, more targeting and intentional planting that includes native species for refuge and increased biodiversity across the site. And that is much more volunteer-friendly work than following a tractor. So we intend to use that time and that effort to engage the community. And we'll continue monitoring and weeding that site as needed to moving forward. And if you are interested in getting involved in our work, I included our volunteer event calendar here. If you want to come out and help us pull some weeds and be involved in any of that on the ground effort, we welcome you. So that's it from me.
Well, excellent. Thank you for that, Jesse. And
Yeah.
so, and Chris for the good overview. We have 7 minutes for Q&A. I'd like to focus that largely on Ravenswood. If we run out of questions there, we can go back to Island Ponds or anything else. But let's first start with the forum members and see if any of them have any questions or comments on the Ravenswood work in general or Save the Bay's work on it. Please feel free to jump in. Not seeing any. Ariel just put the Save the Bay link in the chat. I hope you'll consider signing up. And if you run out of things to plant or weed there, I have a front yard that you're welcome to contact me about helping with. Jane Lavelle, go ahead. You have a question about coordinating with the Safer Bay project. Do you want to elaborate on that?
I just know that we've been approached to SFPUC about the Safer Bay project, and I was wondering if anyone is working with them.
Yeah, it's a good question. We do coordinate with the San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority, which is the main entity advancing the Safer Bay project. We meet with them quarterly to review plans. An awful lot of their levee plans do overlap with restoration project areas and or are on refuge lands. And so there are some decisions to make about the different alignments and the different restoration or mitigation components of their work. Anne or Chris or Rachel, if any of you would like to elaborate on any of that, now's a good time.
Yeah, just very much appreciate how they are coordinating early and often with us to keep us informed as they start to develop some early ideas on how they're going to proceed. And, they do have their first grant for the first phase of the project, which is adjacent to this area. So, really, we've been keeping them informed on what our restoration actions have been, what's going on, some of the challenges of different, easement oversight, landowner rights in that complicated area. So just trying to be a good neighbor to an adjacent project that's going to provide additional flood protection to communities. So I appreciate their coordination with us.
Yeah, I actually think we're meeting with them later this week to go over a couple of ideas for some part of it. So yeah, it's pretty active. And I should note that Margaret Bruce and one of her staff, I forget if it's Kevin or Tess, are members on the Stakeholder Forum and are invited to these meetings too, and generally attend.
It's Tess, yeah.
It is Tess. Okay. So Jane, I will trust that answered your question. And
Yes, it did. Thank you.
awesome. Thanks. So Karen, Forum member Karen High from the Citizens Committee, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to commend the project on all you're doing for habitat as well as public access. And my question would be focused on habitat. I want to commend you for the island ponds and the salt marsh harvest mouse explosion out there. That was phenomenal news. And then there's the longfin smelt in the Coyote Creek area. In the Ravenswood ponds, I'm wondering, I know that, or I had heard that snowy plover were mostly in R4 and we're moving them or hoping they'll relocate to R3. And I was wondering if you could speak about the success of snowy plover nesting in R3.
Sure. Well, Rachel is here and can speak to some of the numbers. I don't think any of SFBBO's plover program leads are here, but I should say, I think you can see the Ravenswood project screen. Plover have occasionally nested in all of these ponds. R4 and R3 were furthest from human disturbance and did the best, and so they tended to use those, but occasionally they've even been in R5. With the conversion of R4 to tidal marsh, we are hoping and expecting that they will sort of just shift over to R3, and we are making enhancements to R3 to make it a better habitat for them. We're, this water control structure that has been installed out here, we've not yet operated it, but it's ready to go. This will allow us to drain that pond earlier each spring and make it more reliable and ready for ground nesting birds earlier each year. And it can also be used periodically for refreshing the forage quality of the water in the slough traces and borrow ditches. So thinking is that will be a good habitat enhancement that may should offset the overall loss of area. And anecdotally, I should say that because R4 filled with so much rainwater this year, we have seen no nesting in R4 because it's still full, but we're getting lots of nests in R3. So it actually does appear that our initial assumptions and hypotheses were not totally unfounded. So I'll stop there and see if Rachel or any of the other biological team have anything to add on that.
I think you did a great job describing that.
I
So
hope.
they do use both ponds when they're available. The snowy plovers are adaptable. So when areas are flooded, they can find other habitat. So like for instance, this year with R4 flooded, then we have more in R3. And that happens throughout the bay as we have different rain patterns. Different ponds will come on at different times. So R3 and R4 have similar constraints and pressures, I would say, from predators are one of their biggest problems out there. And so they will have that. It will remain having some issues with predators at R3 with all the development around, but it's the similar pressure that R4 had as well. So they nest in good numbers and have mixed results depending on predation each year.
Can I ask if you're going to be spreading oyster shell and other things to further enhance the habitat?
I believe we don't have any plans yet, but that's something that we are looking into for all of our projects, you know, as that comes on. Oyster shells are very limited right now with the oyster supply. There really aren't any local oysters to get right now, but we are looking at other options and other ideas of what to lay down to help with camouflage.
Yeah. It is 10:30, which is our scheduled break time. I'll just note, Karen, that we do continually try to work with SFBBO to get grant funds for them to do habitat enhancements, not just shells, but gravel and mud stomps and you know, vegetation removal and things like that. So they generally are pretty successful at getting those funds, and we are trying to dial up that effort as well as the predation control and make that sort of central to ongoing improvements to those ponds. I want to make, if anyone needs to take a break, please do so now. I see Dean Stanford's hand is up, so I will stay and answer that question, but I don't want to take a break time away from anyone that needs it. We're gonna restart at 10:45 specifically, or exactly, if at all possible. Jim, did I see your hand go up? Or maybe you were just waving. No, okay. I thought I saw a hand. All right. So please step away if you need to. Otherwise, Dean, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's pretty cool what's going on over there.
Thank you.
I know the main levees, protection levees being raised up in the Alviso area. Is that going to be happening on the west side of the bay?
Not as the South Bay Shoreline Project, which is the thing we talked about earlier, right? The Army Corps of Engineers led Valley Water partner and State Coastal Conservancy partner. They're the sort of the local sponsors and partners. That project is specific to Santa Clara County, so it will not extend into San Mateo County. That Safer Bay project that was referenced a few minutes ago and asked about is being led by the Joint Powers Authority, which mostly covers the creek. That creek is the border between San Mateo County and Santa Clara County, but their work will also extend shoreward onto the creek adjacent parts of those two counties along the shore of the bay to design and build a similar true engineered flood levee. And so they're pretty early in their planning and staging and fundraising for that. They're beginning work on their programmatic NEPA CEQA document now, and we will continue to collaborate with them, as somebody asked about earlier on this call. Jane LaBelle asked about it on this call. So a little bit earlier, but yeah, it's a similar thing being planned.
Okay, so the ecotone is supposed to help with sea rise, but is all these plantings and stuff going to get inundated?
It is going to get inundated, yeah. And in places where there is uplands behind those transition zones, the ability, as Ann Spanhauer described, of those ecotone plants to trap more sediment and sort of collect more plant propagules basically allows that marsh space to migrate upslope over time, and to sort of keep pace with sea level rise, assuming that sediment supplies stay the same. And so that's why we are taking such pains to include them in so many places, not only for the short-term benefits they have, but as part of a longer-term sea level rise adaptation project. Now, if there's not upland behind it, or if sea level rise is too much or goes on for 100 years, well, eventually we may get over the top of those, but so they are not a single magic bullet solution for that problem, but they do buy us many more decades to address it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks. And
Sure.
One last question: are we going to be discussing the Bay Trail, the impacts on the Bay Trail?
We've been discussing that at each place of the project so far. The Bay Trail at Ravenswood is we are adding connections to it, as at Mountain View. The Bay Trail does not go near the island ponds, so it's not really a factor there. And at A8, as part of the Creeks Marsh Reconnection Project that Valley Water is doing and that we're partnered with them on, we're going to be discussing that later in this meeting. And there are some considerations for Bay Trail additions and connections there as well. So you'll be hearing more about that. But as a system-wide project, no, we don't we don't lead
Yeah.
the Bay Trail except in and around our project areas.
Yeah, I'm concerned around the Aviso area where they're trying to prevent people from using the Bay Trail along the bay, and also the route through Fremont area.
Yeah, I can't speak to the inland route through Fremont. We are going to be adding 4 miles of Bay Trail in Eden Landing, which you will hear about shortly. So, you know, wherever we can, we're adding sections of Bay Trail or at least connections to it. So the places outside the project area, I can't really comment on.
I'd like to see how to figure out a way to have the Bay Trail actually on the bay through.
Well, that is a fundamental tension with habitat restoration and with sea level rise constraints. So I understand that desire, and it's something that we try to find balances on every day.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I am going to take just a quick moment break and come back in time to reconvene everyone. So I'm going to mute myself and thank you all. And we'll be back in just a couple minutes. Thanks. All right. It is 10:50. We're going to resume. I'm going to trust that almost everybody's back who's coming back. If you're not, put your name in the chat if you're not coming back. Sorry, bad joke. Yes, Kelly Graham, we are recording this, and we will be posting notes and the recording, and maybe even the transcript, Ariel, is that right? On the website usually takes a few days, maybe a week.
I wasn't.
Not the transcript?
I will compare the video with the transcript on it and see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wasn't asking, wasn't asking you should do it. It was just asking what the plan was. I think the recording will be on. So, okay, welcome back. Thanks. And also, Kelly, I don't know if you saw earlier in the chat, there is a link to the slide deck themselves. So not the same as the actual presentation, but the slides are there too. So Harley White is back, and the next section of this meeting is about the Eden Landing Ecological Reserve and the phase 2 work there. So Carly, I will let you take it away. Just let me know when you would like me to advance our slides, but maybe first finish whatever it was. Wherever you got cut off, I don't remember before, and sorry again about that.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sorry about that. Hopefully it doesn't happen again, but if it does, I'll try no video. But yes, I'm Carly White. I was saying I've been with the department for about 7 years, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, that is. I just started working here in the Bay Area just over a year ago, working on some drought terrestrial species monitoring type projects. And then just in November, I started my current position as the wildlife biologist for the East Bay and the land manager at Eden Landing. So with that, we can jump into the phase 2 update for Eden Landing. So here is just a basic overview. Many of you are probably familiar with Eden Landing, but if you're not, this is the Hayward and Union City, just south of Highway 92 bridge. The northern portion that you see that's just kind of shaded out, that's the northern end of Eden Landing and was part of phase 1, which is the restoration that we have already completed. And then today we're talking about phase 2, which is the southern portion. And here's kind of a rough map of our general plan on the east side of the property. Those purple inland ponds, those are currently managed ponds that are slated to become enhanced managed ponds. And then to the left of that in the green, the bay ponds, again, current managed ponds, but those are slated to become restored tidal marsh. And finally, in the farther south portion, the tan yellow color, the southern ponds, those are currently mostly seasonal ponds that will become enhanced and see some muted tidal action. Next slide. So here's a little bit more detail for how we intend to accomplish this. The tidal area will contain breaches into Old Alameda Creek, some sections of lowered levee, and a pilot channel. The enhanced ponds will contain various water control structure repairs or replacements to increase our ability to manage them. We're going to add a section of Bay Trail, shown here in purple, connecting to existing portions of it in the north and south. Yeah, and then I'll go over that in a little bit more detail in a minute, but first I have some numbers for you. So next slide. So phase 2 at Eden Landing will restore 1,635 acres of tidal marsh along the bay. And that tidal marsh is going to serve as habitat for species like the endangered salt marsh harvest mouse and black or ridgeway rails, some of which we've heard about already in earlier presentations. Phase 2 will also include 765 acres of enhanced managed ponds. Generally on the property, our managed ponds are managed at different depths, different times a year for different species of migratory water birds. For example, you've heard us talking about snowy plovers or least terns. We made dry ponds down for in the summer for nesting, keeping ponds kind of shallow in the spring and fall for migratory shorebirds, and deeper in the winter for waterfowl. Additionally, there will be about 450 acres of muted tidal restoration. So that will include a variety of vegetated tidal marsh, open water, and mudflat habitat for a variety of species. Next slide. So phase 2 also includes flood risk management improvements. Marsh is an excellent buffer for the residential areas for flooding, and give a really great overview of habitat transition zones. And we'll have a similar thing here in Eden Landing, that 30-to-1 slope she was describing, that's going to provide a variation of elevation for different plant species and therefore different habitat types, and also serve as high tide refugia for tidal marsh species, as in addition to erosion protection for the marsh and the ponds, and then eventually the residential areas behind that. Phase 2 also includes storm water management features for the flood control district. We'll be maintaining overflow sills and increasing our capacity to manage the water flow in the managed ponds, which benefits flooding by being able to move that water quicker, more efficiently. Next slide.
Yep. Sorry, just a lag.
No worries at all. So public access, I mentioned we're going to connect to existing portions of the Bay Trail. The new trail is shown again in purple. We're going to connect to the existing Bay Trail and the seasonal loop trail at Eden Landing North, shown in the green. And then down in the south, we will connect to the existing regional trail on the Alameda County Flood Control Channel. This trail will be about 4 miles that we're adding, and it will be held to Bay Trail design standards, which is 12 feet wide with 1 to 2 foot shoulders. It'll be ADA compliant surface and grading, and it will be drivable for both maintenance and safety. We also will have a community connection trail to Union City at Vesey Street, which is shown in the cutout here. Just another access point to jump on the trail. And throughout that whole stretch, we'll have a couple viewing platforms with benches and informational signs. Another feature to note is we'll be building a bridge over the stormwater channel in the south. And all existing public access will be retained. Thank you. Phase 2 at Eden Landing is going to be implemented in stages. Stage A is most of the project elements, pretty much everything I've mentioned so far. And then stage B will include our connections to the Alameda Creek Flood Control Channel in the south. Where we are now, we're in design and permitting. Designs are about 60% done. We've submitted our permit applications, and they're currently being reviewed by the Flood Control District. And we plan to start construction in 2024. So we can look at stage A in a little bit more detail. Again, it's everything that doesn't touch the flood control channel down in the south. So you see we have a couple breaches into Old Alameda Creek in the black symbols with the green triangles. We will create one major pilot channel into the tidal marsh area. The power of the tides and marsh accumulation should form the rest of the channels on their own. As part of that tidal area, we'll be improving the bayfront levee to the far west of the project area. It will be raised, and it will have that 30-to-1 slope habitat transition zone into the tidal marsh. Similarly, on the east side of the property, or in the middle, I should say, on the east side of the tidal area, is that mid-complex levee is what we refer to it as, that will also be raised and improved to help protect from erosion. And it will also have that 30-to-1 slope habitat transition zone. The managed ponds in the kind of pinkish color, like I mentioned, we'll have those water control structure repairs or installations shown with the green dots, and that will just help us move water more precisely throughout the ponds so that we can have accurate water levels, maintain circulation, and keep good water quality. And then in the south, the ponds slated to be muted tidal, those are going to receive some internal improvements as well, including a channel, some areas of varying elevation, and better connections for water flow between the ponds. Next slide. So zooming into the southern portion for stage B, some of this is still in the works, in the planning works, but the idea is adding habitat connections to the flood control channel. So another breach for the tidal area into the flood control channel, which will be armored and would include a bridge over the breach so that the regional trail that exists now can still get out to the bayfront. And then additionally improving the connection to the southern ponds to the flood control channel so that they can be more muted tidal and manage themselves. Next slide. So throughout our planning process, we have engaged the community and local tribes as much as possible. We've made formal outreach to the Confederated Villages of Lejeune. We've also been out in the community at street fairs and other events, tabling, trying to introduce our plan to the community. We've had a web survey for preferred viewing areas for the Bay Trail, and done school group tours, as well as coordinated with the Bike Coalition on the Bay Trail. And we look forward to continuing those efforts in the future and keeping the community involved as much as possible. So with that, this is what the phase 2 area looks like today, those large managed ponds. And that's also what's behind me on my background. So hopefully in sometime in the future, this will be very nice, lovely tidal marsh.
Well, that was great. Thanks, Carly. We have a few minutes for Q&A on this, something like 5 to 8 minutes, something right in there. So we will start first with forum members and see if any of them have any questions or comments on that. I see Karen High's hand up.
Hi, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more, Carly, about the breaches, the southern breaches into Alameda, the flood control channel this past winter with all the sediment that has come down from the watershed. There's huge amounts of sediment sitting in that flood control channel. Would sure love to see those going towards tidal marsh restoration. So is there any timeline? Is it years in the future? What's the plan?
I might deflect this one to Dave or Colin, maybe. People that have been a little bit more involved. This part's still kind of in the works. And being new to my position, I'm learning details.
That was that's totally appropriate. We've been, Karen and others, as you know, we've been negotiating with the Alameda Flood Control District about all of these changes for a decade, right? So the changing a federal flood levy needs a Section 408 permit, which is a whole separate regulatory process that has to go through Congress, and it is a much more time-consuming process. It is also more complicated in terms of the hydrodynamic modeling and the engineering design that has to be done. If we direct both Alameda Creek and Old Alameda Creek into those bay ponds, we essentially are connecting two watersheds that are currently separate, and that may produce some flow-through conditions that might delay fluvial outflows in one watershed or the other. And so before we can move forward with stage B, we have to satisfy all those concerns on the flood control district's part, and our part too. We have no interest in increasing flood risk, right? So that has to happen. And so to answer that's why we broke them apart, and that's why we're aggressively moving forward with stage A, because that will at least get the marsh restoration going in those bay ponds, and will also improve the pond habitat in the most timely manner possible. And then while that's being built, we can then shift efforts with the flood control district and with their consultants and ours to do the added modeling and the added geotechnical design work And so I expect stage B to lag the development of stage A by a couple of years. And I know you've heard some of that before, and I realize that was a lot of words, but I wanted to make sure that for others who aren't as familiar with it, we sort of walk people through the reasoning and the process. It's going to take a couple more years to do that. Realistically, we have recently agreed on grant funds to be directed to the
Okay.
flood control district to work with us on their parts of it and to pay their people and to sort of cover those things. So we are moving forward. They've recently sort of validated to themselves our design work on stage A, and so I'm cautiously optimistic that things may move forward. But I hesitate to, put any specific of a number on that.
Thank you. I was going to ask about funding next, so you answered.
Yeah, and that's why. Yeah. So it's not sufficient for everything they need to do, but it's certainly enough to cover their early stages of design and modeling and some geotechnical analysis and things like that, right? So any other questions from or comments, feedback from the forum members, or anything to add? Colin, Dudley, or John, anything to add on any of our details so far?
And I see Arthur's hand up, also just noting Pat Showalter had a comment in the chat that as a BCDC commissioner, it makes her happy to see all the additions to the Bay Trail. So.
As a walker, Pat, I share your sentiment. So go ahead, Arthur.
All right. Well, I just want to follow up on what Karen said. One, I was going to ask about the money too, so it's comforting to know you're actually going to be able to do the science on this now. But if there's all that sediment there, and I understand, I hope I got this right, that the Army Corps is already involved in a sediment plan for Whale's Tail area, which is somewhere around here. And you have all this other sediment available. Not that you can just go out there and shovel it around, but it would be a shame if, considering how we've been hearing, some of us, about the lateral erosion of our outboard marshes on the east side. And actually, that's been going on for 20 years. Paul Kelly of Fish and Wildlife was talking about that 20 years ago. It would be a shame to lose any of that sediment if we're having marshes that are already eroding and figure out how to move that around.
Yeah. It's a lot there to unpack, Arthur. I'm certainly happy to take the first stab at it. And if anyone on the project team would like to weigh in or elaborate or clarify, correct me, feel free. But the reason to do the connection of Alameda Flood Control Channel to the Bay Ponds, one of them is for sediment delivery directly into the interior of the restoring marsh there that we hope to get, right? So yes, there's a lot of sediment that was deposited in that channel now, and frankly, over the last decade or so. When that connection is made, that need will go down because a lot of that sediment will get delivered directly into the interior. As for the sediment that is there now, well, the flood control district does periodically need to dredge all of its channels. It will need to do that at some point in the future, not just because of last winters, but just because that's a standard thing they do. That sediment, when it's dredged out of the channels, does go to I think you all can see my screen. This parcel of land right up here is owned by the public works district, the flood control district, excuse me, and they use that to store their dredge material there. And so they will put it there, and we will test it and screen it. And if it's clean enough for to pass the quality assurance program plan and get used in a wetland restoration project, we will do that. So fingers crossed, it shouldn't go to waste, Arthur, is to answer that question. Last thing you asked about was the Army Corps Strategic Sediment Pilot Project. What they're doing, for those of you that don't already know it, is this existing marsh out here is Southern Whale's Tail. There's one just like that under the map legend here at Northern Eden Landing. That's Northern Whale's Tail. And what the Army Corps of Engineers is doing is testing whether or not dredge material placed on the very shallow water mudflat outside of the ponds will be carried by the tides up into either existing marsh, restoring marsh, or subsided managed ponds once they're open. And so they've been working on, and we have been collaborating with them on the design and planning for that, and they are very interested in getting that going. And I think they're getting close to that, right? I think they have their permits now, and they should be getting rolling. So if that works, you can imagine larger scale implementations of things like that, which we are hopeful will be a longer term solution to the sediment supply problem.
Great. Yeah, I think they have the funding, right? That was one of the pilot projects they have funded.
Yes,
so.
the pilot project is funded. Yeah, the larger implementation, of course, is a whole separate ball of wax, right? But we have just another minute or two. Any other questions or comments from the forum members? If not, I see Mr. Stanford's hand is still up, and we can go there. Dean, if your hand is real or if it's left over from before. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Couple of questions. The Bay Trail, it just ends at that channel. Is there going to be a bridge, or where does the Bay Trail go from there south?
There are, well, the existing Bay Trail ends just in Coyote Hills Park. There's a Alameda Creek Regional Trail on the south side of it too, and it will continue south from there. As far as a bridge over the flood control channel, there we did include some very preliminary environmental analysis in our NEPA CEQA document for this project, with the idea that that might spark enough interest and public outcry in the adjacent landowners, East Bay Parks, the cities, perhaps the Bay Trail itself, could take the lead on that. We don't own the land on either side of the flood control channel or the channel itself, so we can't actually build that ourselves. But we tried to do some initial sort of early steps in moving that ahead. So
okay.
And I have had meetings with all the cities and with East Bay Parks and others about, hey, would you guys be interested in sort of putting together a collaborative effort to move ahead on that? And I didn't get a lot of takers. Everybody wants it. It's a very challenging thing to lead something as big as that, and so no one has taken the bait so far.
Yeah, funding probably.
Yeah.
My second question, I think a couple of years ago I attended a Capitol Corridor rail scoping meeting, and they were proposing building a levee with like a concrete raised viaduct, and it started somewhere around this area and slashed all the way across the bay down to Alviso. And I proposed a trail on the levee. Does anybody know if any of that is?
I have never heard
real?
about anything like that. I've heard about some Dumbarton Rail Corridor crossings of the bay, but nothing large on piles going down the eastern shore between here and Alviso. Which isn't to say it doesn't exist. I just haven't been a part of it.
Yeah, I have no idea what the outcome of their scoping was, if they've given up on it or.
Okay.
Well, it was only going to save like 8 minutes of time.
Yeah.
Or something. So I don't know if it's worth how many billions of dollars it would cost.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I'm not seeing any other hands or anything, so we're going to keep to our schedule and we're going to move on to the next bit. Thanks for that, Carly. And we do have a few important outside collaborative projects to shine a light on, and we have a couple guest speakers on those. So the first of those is the South San Francisco Bay Shoreline Project, which is the question that Dean Stanford asked some questions about earlier. Shalini is here from the Coastal Conservancy. Go right ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shalini Kannan, a project manager at the State Coastal Conservancy and a member of the project team of the South San Francisco Bay Shoreline Project. This project is being led by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Conservancy, and Santa Clara Valley Water District, with a lot of collaboration from the landowners as well, which are U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Santa Clara County Parks, and the San Jose Santa Clara Regional Wastewater Facility. Project goals include providing tidal flood protection, restoring and enhancing tidal marsh and other shoreline habitats, and providing recreational and public access opportunities. The purple oval you see in this map shows the entire South Bay Shoreline Study area, but the project is divided into several phases. And I'll go over phase 1 first and then touch briefly on phases 2 and 3. So this red oval is phase 1, and this involves building a FEMA certifiable levee to protect the historically excluded community of Alviso, which is subsided about 12 feet below sea level. The project will protect 2,000 residents, 3,000 commuters, and critical infrastructure, including water treatment facilities and Highway 237. This phase will construct approximately 4 miles of levee, which is in the dark red line in this map. All good, Dave. And all the ponds will eventually be open to the tides, restoring 2,900 acres of tidal marsh on lands owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is that left segment on the map of the ponds. And these ponds are part of the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project. Pond A18 on the right is an 800-acre pond held by the City of San Jose's Regional Wastewater Facility, and this area would also be restored. In the blue box is reaches 1 through 3, and construction started on these reaches in December 2021 and is expected to be complete in the summer of 2025. Reaches 4 and 5 are in the pink box on the right, and they're in the design phase. The design is temporarily on hold. The total project cost of phase 1 is $545 million. And though there's been a lot of successful fundraising in the last year to secure the majority of the budget, we're conducting a value engineering study now to identify ways to reduce overall project costs. Next slide, Dave. Habitat restoration is a priority in phase 1, and we're working with San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory to rehabilitate a nursery on Fish and Wildlife Service property to grow local native species for vegetating the levee. We're also designing and constructing ecotones, which are my colleagues went over earlier, but here's an image of the ecotone for this project. And this area will provide refuge during storms or high tides and will allow for habitat to transition upslope as sea level rises. The salt marsh harvest mouse and other wetland species will benefit from these features. Next slide. We've also been working on shoreline project phases 2 and 3 feasibility studies, which are shown roughly in the upper map in the purple and blue ovals. Phase 2 all the way on the left. This feasibility study began in September 2019, and so far hydraulic models and economic analyses are complete, and the team is determining next steps. Phase 3 has received federal funding for a feasibility study, and work is kicking off this year. The bottom map shows a potential alignment for the phase 3 levee that came out of the City of Sunnyvale and its stakeholders visioning process. And the Corps will study and evaluate various alignment options. So next slide. This was a big subject for a quick talk, but we wanted to make sure the Stakeholder Forum members had an update on this project. But there's my email, so please feel free to reach out if you have any further questions or stay on the call until after the meeting.
Well, thank you, Shalini, and I'll apologize. I don't know what was going on with the mouse or anything then, and the slides kept advancing on you, and I don't know why, and I'm sorry. And it just happened again, and I didn't touch a button, so I don't know what happened there. But Judy Nam from the Santa Clara Valley Water District is up next to talk about this project, whose name is almost as long as the name of Eden Landing. After that, we will have a few minutes for Q&A on those two projects, and I will mention just a couple others, and then we'll have our last guest speaker from One Shoreline. So Judy, if you are ready, take it away, and I will try not to advance the slides until you tell me to.
Thanks for the introduction, Dave. Hi, my name is Judy Nam, the project manager for the Calabasas and Santa Moschino Creek Marsh Connection Project, the first creek marsh connection project in the North-South San Francisco Bay. The project is in partnership with the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, along with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, State Coastal Conservancy, and Caltrans. Project has won close to $8 million in grant funding from San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and EPA, thanks to overwhelming support from the project partners, local agencies, including City of San Jose, Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, County of Santa Clara, environmental communities, including Citizen Committee to Complete Refuge, Save the Bay, Sierra Club, and Audubon Society, and local community groups like South Bay Yacht Club and Alviso Water Collaborative. I would like to direct your attention to the project map, and project extent is indicated by red outlines. For those of you who are familiar with the project, would have noticed changes in project extent, that now the project includes Valley Water's own Pond A4. Addition of Pawnee 4 presents significant additional habitat restoration opportunity and was only possible because of all the support I have mentioned. I hope this increased restoration opportunity makes my predecessor, Pat Showalter, proud. Thanks, Pat, for your continued support. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the project has foremost objective of habitat restoration with over 1,800 tidal marsh habitat, 1,500 acre in AA ponds owned and operated by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the remaining 300 acre coming from Pawnee 4, and other valuable habitats, including transitional and riparian habitats. Project will provide resilient flood protection by establishing tidal marsh that will keep pace with the sea level rise. Also connecting Calabasas and Santa Mosquito Creek to AA ponds and Sunnyvale East and West channels to Pawnee 4 will help with reducing sediment accumulation in these creeks and channels and allow the sediment to set on the pond bottom instead. By restoring the creek to marsh connection, we're hoping to reduce creek maintenance needs and accelerate tidal marsh establishment by maximizing sediment supplies through taking advantage of both creek and bay sediment supplies. This project will provide improved public access, and we're currently exploring various trail concepts, including filling in 1 mile bay trail gap that will connect existing bay trail. Next slide. So just last week, we had a public meeting to receive feedback on various project conceptual alternatives, and modeling will be performed to compare these alternatives. More meetings are scheduled in coming fall to get public feedback on trails. And January of 2024, we're planning to present feasible alternatives to the public for feedback. The latest project schedule shows the planning phase to conclude by spring of 2025 and planning and design phase to wrap up by 2027. If we're successful in securing grant funding for construction phase, and then I'm confident it will happen with your continued support, we're hoping to start our construction in 2027, 2028 timeframe. Thank you, and that's a brief overview of Calabasas Santa Mosquito Creek Marsh Connection Project.
All right, well, thanks, Judy. I am going to look at this moment of Zen picture here while I skip to the next slide and just note that, you know, we had a question earlier about the Safer Bay project, so I can maybe skip this again, except just to note that, you know, we do meet with the Joint Powers Authority pretty regularly to go over the long-term planning and coordination to help look at the questions and issues that the different alternatives that they are just beginning to think through and develop now will need to include. Our next speaker is Colin Martirana from One Shoreline, who is going to talk about the Bayfront Canal and Atherton Channel project, which is completing and operating. But Colin, just that's your early warning. You're in the green room. If we have any questions on the Shoreline project or on the Creeks Marsh Connection project, you have just a couple of minutes to cover those. So we'll start, as always, with forum members first, if anyone has anything to add or ask about. Oh, Karen, go ahead, please.
Hi, sorry, there have been so many back and forths on the Shoreline project, and I just want to make sure I understand that there is now funding for restoration. Is that correct, or am I incorrect?
We don't have all of the project isn't yet fully funded. We do have the majority of funds and are working on reducing costs so that it is funded.
Are there particular, so would you be working on the ecotone along A12, A13? Is that funded, or are there particular areas that are funded?
Well, right now the reaches 1 through 3 construction is under contract, so that part is fully funded. The other parts are not, like the cost is not firm until we get the contractor estimate as well. Neil, do you want to chime in at all?
Yeah. So for the phase 1 project for the federal funding, we have all of the federal funding to complete the levee and flood risk management features. We also have all of the federal funding associated with restoring pond A18 and A12 for the
Neil, we lost
pond.
your last sentence. If you could just repeat that.
I forget what I said, but
I think you said you had funding for A9 through 15 restoration. Is that right?
So we do not yet have funding for A9 through A15, but that work isn't going to occur until 2034. Is that the current estimate? We're looking at potentially moving it sooner, but it represents a relatively small cost in the overall cost for construction. And so we have the vast majority of the federal funding that we need, but then there's also a very significant local sponsor required funding that's also needed to implement the project. But on the federal side, we have all of the funding we need for the majority of construction.
I'm sorry, you were cut off talking about pond 18. Can you repeat that?
So we have the funding that we need to restore pond A18.
Okay, we are gonna need to cover the last question or two because we do have a guest speaker and then we have a long section on science to cover. So I understand we're not going to get to everything on the shoreline project, but I would invite anyone who is interested in discussing that to hang around in the after meeting portion, and perhaps Neil and or Shalini can do that. Eileen McLaughlin and then Jim, and then we will move on. Eileen?
Hi. I have a question that I'm going to shorten the name to the Pond 8 Creek Connection Project. and that came up to me in those thoughts. And then I was comparing it to a slide that was presented earlier by Anne about the that same, the Pond A8 ecotone treatments. And when I did attend the meeting that the public meeting for this Creek Connection project last week, and the ecotone shown there went from the breach, but not as far along to the west, the landfill as on the other one, which is a more accurate portrayal of what is intended for the ecotone between that breach and the Guadalupe Slough.
It's a great question, Eileen, and I'm thankful to you for raising that up. The closed landfill is on the southeast corner. That ecotone is going to be built where shown. It should match on both of those graphics. The one at the southwest corner will not extend as far west as on the map that Anne showed earlier in her talk. That was the original concept for it. We realized in developing that it actually mistakenly went a little too far to the west and covered an existing siphon. So it's going to be slid along the southern side a little bit closer to the breach location. And so it's the same area and volume of fill, the same general impacts. It's just going to be shifted over a little bit.
Okay, so, and I was thinking about toward the east side from the Greek Connection breach. Or are we on the same, since we don't have a map here?
Let me very quickly go back to that.
I don't know if you can quickly do it. I'm sorry, Jake.
I can quickly do it. No, it's okay. It's a good. I just want to make sure I don't go past it. So this one's the same. This one's the same. This notch is where it is, right? This is that reversible armor notch. Right. This is staying here. This is more or less going to be there. The breach with the two creeks is going to be in this general neighborhood, and this ecotone that's shown here is going to be slid over to the west a little bit to basically kind of go like in this little area that I'm sort of outlining.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Okay, that makes sense. And the one toward the notch, as I recall, that part of the levee had to be reinforced by the refuge because of erosion. So would this ecotone help to prevent erosion?
It already has been doing that, and it will continue to do that. Yeah, right. We're gonna grade it out to make a more gradual slope, which should further slow the erosion over time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think I think Jim Irvin, if you can ask one question quickly, we can get more or less back on track here.
Yeah, I guess it's a loaded question, but yeah, I just heard and I was I guess a little shocked that 9 through 15 are not planned for restoration until 2034. I understand levy project and funding and such, but yeah, it was great. I hear this with great dismay, and the question would be, God, what needs to be done to expedite or accelerate that planning process? I know it's not an easy question, probably no answer, but that's shocking. Considering the progress we've seen with I guess restoration of longfin smelt and many other species just from the reopening of Pond A19 and 21. To leave that huge amount of area just sitting there without any restoration whatsoever for another decade. Anyway, I'm stunned, but that's my comment.
Yeah, I can speak to that, and so I should have clarified that. So the previous plan for the project was to complete all of the flood risk management features, and then restore Pond A12 and A18, and then there would be a roughly 5-year period where we monitored the restoration there, and then another 5 years to breach A9 through A11, and then another 5 years for A13 to A15. And so we are looking at, I guess, given the existing internal berms within those ponds, as well as looking at opportunities to potentially accelerate that restoration, that it could occur potentially much sooner than that. But if we're following kind of the sequence that we had previously assumed and laid out, that's how we get to 2034. But we are definitely looking at opportunities to try to accelerate that versus what was previously assumed.
All right. Thank you for that clarification, Neil. And as always, we can talk more about this after. And I hate to cut this off here, but
Dave,
we're gonna
just quickly note an invitation in the chat for the Creeks Connection to go and talk to some local communities about recreation options.
Right. Betsy Migas put that note in there, Judy. I hope you do see that. I know you're continuing your outreach with the various city plannings and the advisory committees within them. So looking forward to being a part of those discussions too. So with that, we're going to shift gears into one of our nice success stories. Colin Martirana, are you here and available? If so, can you put yourself on camera so I can see that you're here?
Yeah, are you able to hear me and see me okay?
You look fabulous, Colin. Fabulous.
So I'm going for it.
And you sound even better. In the interest of teeing you up, I'm just going to introduce this one thing that I forgot to mention. The Shoreline Project and Creeks Marsh Reconnection Project, once they are complete, will indeed push us over 50% total tidal marsh and up into the range of like 60, 63%, something like that. So assuming those happen as you have heard, we will be over the low end of our restoration staircase deadline. So Colin, with that, take it away. And I'm sorry for the delay in getting to you, but thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Dave, for the introduction and for having me. Yeah, we're here at One Shoreline are happy to be able to participate in conversations like this, and yeah, much appreciated. So yeah, I'm Colin Martirana, project manager here at the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, also known as One Shoreline. And I am the lead on the district's first major construction project, the Bayfront Canal and Atherton Channel Flood Protection and Ecosystem Restoration Project. I'll provide a quick introduction of One Shoreline, just so everyone has that context, get into the successful collaborative effort that I'm here to talk about today, and then, yeah, happy to leave a few minutes for questions at the end. So first, a little bit about our agency. Go ahead, Dave.
Yep.
Thanks. So over the past 125 years, bay water levels have been observed to rise at about 8 inches over this past 125 years, about 1 inch every 15.6 years. Today's current science coming from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration report that was released in 2022 projects that rate will increase to about 1 inch every 3.8 years. And go ahead, Dave, next slide. In the meantime, San Mateo County, in which our agency is kind of housed, in a multitude of ways, may be considered the most vulnerable county to sea level rise in the state of California. We have substantial developments, especially along our bay shoreline and critical infrastructure, transportation corridors, along the 100 miles or so of Pacific and bay shorelines, puts us at pretty critical risk. Dave, you can advance 2 slides here. Just gonna save a little time. So prior to One Shoreline, there existed a former flood control district housed within the county of San Mateo that collected property taxes and implemented projects in about 10% of the county area, with very little shoreline on the bay shoreline and no coastside. And as a result, it was identified or recognized that former flood control district was not well positioned to be able to respond to the transformative water-related impacts from climate change. Working at a region-wide perspective. So in January of 2020, through state legislation, One Shoreline was established to build solutions in response to those threats, working cross-jurisdictionally. Go ahead, Dave. So zooming in on the project area, this is immediately adjacent to the Ravenswood Pond Complex as part of the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration effort. Atherton Channel and Bayfront Canal collect and drain stormwater. Thanks for identifying those. They drain stormwater from about a 9 square mile area that collects rainwater off of parts of the cities of Menlo Park and Redwood City, the towns of Woodside and Atherton, and parts of unincorporated county. Normally, those flows drain through a tide gate that is owned and operated by the city of Redwood City, and where Dave is indicating is about where it drains out first into Flood Slough and then eventually out into the bay. And naturally, during high tides, those tide gates are closed, which constrains the stormwater flows solely to the undersized Bayfront Canal, which was really never designed to be able to manage any level of stormwater. As a result, go ahead, advance 1, please. As a result, we, over the decades that these records have been recorded, we saw 40 significant flood events over that 70-year period, nearly on an annual basis, instituting public health and safety concerns, street closures, property damage, just incurred expenses, of course. And so, in response to that, planning for a project began over a decade ago, and to provide flood protection to the community immediately adjacent to Bayfront Canal that had experienced flooding for decades. Yeah, no, that's fine. So shortly after establishment, One Shoreline inherited this project, which is now known as the Bayfront Canal and Atherton Channel Flood Protection Ecosystem Restoration Project. And after securing environmental permits, land access rights, completing the design, establishing a cost sharing agreement for the benefiting agencies, the agencies that contribute stormwater to Bayfront Canal, construction was initiated in June of 2021. And as this project bridges jurisdictional bounds, requiring land access rights, both on private lands, with the local agencies, state and federal jurisdictions as well, environmental permissions from a whole alphabet soup of permitting agencies, in addition to funding contributed by the State Department of Water Resources. It's pretty clear that a cross-jurisdictional agency like Wind and Shoreline was needed to be able to push a project like this forward. So we're happy to be filling that role. Go ahead and advance. So this is just a kind of a zoomed in depiction of a plan and profile of the project that was implemented and ultimately completed in early 2022. There's a diversion structure that sits on Bayfront Canal, on the bank of Bayfront Canal, with an automatically operating trash rack. It's indicated by the number 2 call out there. At a particular depth within Bayfront Canal, depth of water spills over a weir through that trash capture device. And by the way, that trash capture device is able to capture trash and debris down to about the size of a cigarette butt, which in and of itself is a great success, because otherwise it had previously just been spilling to the bay untreated. So we were pretty excited just by that success in and of itself. Once that water is diverted, it collects into a basin to create the pressure head necessary to create a siphon that drives water underground below the entrance to Bedwell Bayfront Park, and eventually spills into a portion of the Ravenswood Pond complex, initially into pond R5 and S5 complex. The structure itself is made up of 2 parallel 550-foot long, 8-foot by 5-foot culverts, concrete box culverts. And this is really that interface, being able to take advantage of the capacity that pond complex has to offer. Is that space is really where the collaborative successes of our projects really shines through. So just within that one complex, we have about 165 acre feet of stormwater capacity available to us. It is an important kind of freshwater contribution source to the refuge and their restoration efforts. So that was a great success there as well. Additionally, through some extensive conversations, we were able to arrange for on-project site mitigation. We were able to provide the slopes and elevations necessary in the native planting to be able to provide habitat and regulated water necessary for the impacts from our project. Additionally, some of our work required excavation of soil, particularly in the forebay to pond S5. And we were able to arrange for that to be beneficially reused as part of the efforts with pond complex, as part of the refuge effort. So yeah, I just want to share a little bit of that. Thanks, Dave. This is my last slide with content. So some of the lessons learned from our first years of operation, and it was quite an impressive first year of operation. From what I was able to determine, we observed 9 diversions over this past water year, wet season, starting in mid-December through mid-March. And it's pretty, we are seeing what we observed this past season in historic terms, certainly extraordinarily, but we anticipate, the science kind of suggests that we can expect events like we observed earlier this year to become more the ordinary. And I have a quote, it's kind of paraphrased here, but it's that first bullet point. California went from the 3 driest years on record to the 3 wettest weeks on record, a quote from the director of Department of Water Resources. And so that's the kind of situation that we're anticipating going forward, and part of why One Shoreline was established in response to that reality. So with this project in place and operational, the community adjacent experienced significantly reduced flooding from what has been experienced from much smaller events in the past. We encountered several record level storm events. And as reported to me, there was only one instance of overtopping of Bayfront Canal, and otherwise there appears to be actual failures of water to be conveyed to Bayfront Canal, but otherwise we had the capacity available to take on additional stormwater. And so that was a massive success, and we're happy to be able to report out on that. And that kind of leads to our future looking forward. This important flood mitigation system, it's certainly worth mentioning, it would certainly not be possible without the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, Chris Barr and Dave Halsing's leadership in being able to implement this project and make it the success that it is. And it opens up the opportunity for additional flood mitigation work upstream now with this additional capacity built in, kind of at what was formerly the bottleneck. So thanks, Dave. Yeah, and then there's my last slide. Thank you. A bit of information of how to contact us, and happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks for that, Colin. And and just kind of reiterating, like I said at the outset, we can't do like significant flood management projects on our own, but by collaborations like the one that Colin just described, we actually can be a part of them and can make meaningful improvements in people's lives. So I'm grateful for everybody's work on that. It was cast of thousands over the years. So we have really just a minute or two for questions because we do have a long science item here. Colin's, well, I guess that's not your email, Colin, but maybe you could drop that in the chat, or if there's a way for somebody to contact you directly for follow-up. But if there's any big picture pressing questions on the Bayfront Canal project, we should take just a moment to hear those now.
Yeah, I'm happy to drop my email into the chat, and just for frankness, I'm the one that fields the info at email, okay. So either one will go directly to me.
Well, that's great. I wasn't sure about that, but any big questions for Colin? If not, we will tee up Donna for update on all of our science. I'm not seeing anything, so we're gonna roll on. Thanks again, Colin, for being here, and thanks to Len as well. So Donna, take it away.
Great, thanks everybody. So I had a note to myself this morning to talk slower. I may put that aside, so hold on you guys, and we'll move fast through some science here. Yeah, I'm the lead scientist for the project. I'm actually employed by San Francisco Estuary Institute and work for the project under a contract from the State Coastal Conservancy. And so in my role, I help make sure that we're implementing the adaptive management plan, provide input into all the implementation that's happening, but I really do a lot of tracking and coordinating the science that a lot of the tremendous scientists on the project are actually doing the work for. So next slide. So I'm just going to go over today, basically what we're doing in phase 2. So we're trying to expand on the phase 1 science that a lot of the applied studies that were done as part of that part of the project. I reported out to this group before in our last stakeholder meeting, I believe, that we worked with Point Blue to develop a climate and science synthesis that led to an actual science framework, and then a plan that we use internally to implement the science for the project. We're continuing to do science studies per the adaptive management plan, and I'll talk about those a little bit. And in this phase of the project, we've really worked hard on regional science collaboration. We're involved in the Bay RMP and the Nutrient Management Strategy Group, and have leadership in the Wetlands Regional Monitoring Program planning. We try to do outreach to you all through the website. And then I want to highlight again, thanks we talked early about the Science Symposium. I think Rachel mentioned this. All of the science talks that we had during the Science Symposium last year are posted on the website. So while I'm going to give you high-level pieces today, you can actually go back in and hear from all of those scientists by going to the website. Next slide. So as we work through the science framework, development of the science framework, these 4 priorities rose to the top. We're doing a lot of other science, some work around fish synthesis and continuing to think about other aspects of the project, but these 4 rows to the top, and these are the 4 that I'll mainly be focusing on in this talk. Next slide. So I'll start with the snowy plover. This is Maddie Schwartz is at San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory, is the new tern and plover director. And she supplied this photo of the first new snowy plovers that hatched here. I think she said on the 5th. So the project is we're really working to maintain diversity and abundance per the adaptive management plan, which includes contributing to the recovery goal, thinking of managing and predation, and helping with the habitat enhancements. And then really thinking a lot about regional habitat availability. And this last one's been really important. We're doing pretty well on the project and as maintaining the populations of the plover, but it's falling all on the project at this point in the South Bay. And we're hoping that we can diversify where some of the plovers are nesting throughout the estuary. So that's my little plug for having other areas of the estuary or other projects contribute to plover habitat. Next slide. As I said, we're doing really well. I think I wrote the numbers down. We're trying to maintain a population of 250 breeding birds. I think we had 263 in 2021 and 281 in 2022. So we're doing fine, but we are continuing to convert ponds. And so that's one of the areas that we're focusing on, is how can we continue to make sure that we're maintaining these birds within the project area. So we're doing a lot of monitoring and studies, as San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory is leading the studies for breeding surveys. They're doing they've upped their game on banding, so they're doing a lot more banding of birds to really be able to track which ones are coming back to the site. We're doing studies on predation and thinking, and that'll be a theme throughout this little presentation, as we're really focusing a lot on predation for all species. It's become clear that that's one of our major issues for managing for species within the project. And then, as I think has been mentioned several times, habitat enhancements at various project sites. Next slide. So as I said, I'm just walking through these really quickly. I will be available during the open house for specific questions. Most of you know, I think, that we are tracking the success and how the water birds are doing within the pond or the project footprint. So our goal through the adaptive management plan is to maintain the numbers of migratory and nesting water birds. And predation was also mentioned in the plan. So our studies right now in phase 2 are focused on breeding water bird surveys. USGS has been doing these surveys for over 20 years, and we had them I'll talk a little bit about the work they did in 2022, and we plan to have them back out again in 2024. SFBBO is doing pond surveys for the migratory birds, fall, winter, and spring surveys. And they're also doing specific studies on phalaropes, and I'll go into that a little bit more, both contributing to the bay, our understanding of what's happening in the bay, as well as what's happening range-wide. And then we've also contributed funds towards the installation of MODIS towers, which when birds are banded, we can track their movements. So next slide. Just quickly, a little bit on the water birds specifically. As I said, USGS is continuing to monitor avocet, stilts, and terns. Next slide. And this is the quick results. They don't have their paper out yet, but just informally, this is their results from 2022. We continue to see declines in American avocets and black-necked stilts. But the really crazy thing that happened this year is we saw the highest number of Forster's tern nests that we've ever seen over the period that they've been monitoring. And so this is one of the areas that we'll continue to monitor and then continue to think about as we think about managed ponds versus tidal marshes and the needs of these species, particularly with regard to predation. Next slide. And the exciting thing is that all of those nests, that high number of nests that we found, were found in Pond A16 and Pond SF2, which were both specifically designed to help with the breeding water birds and the migratory water birds. Next slide. We have seen one of the species where we've seen pretty significant declines over the 20-year period, and I'll go into that a little bit more on the history, are phalaropes. And so we've been commissioning San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory to really do some in-depth studies for us so that we can try to maintain the numbers that we have of these species and the breeding success of what we see. They do migratory pond as part of their pond survey work every year. We've been working to adjust the timing of those surveys. You know, through some work with staff at SFBBO, we've understand that some of the timing of the surveys was off a little bit, so we've adjusted those timings to be able to better capture which birds are here when. Nathan Van Schmidt at SFBBO just did a little study on historical trends for phalaropes, and understanding that these birds have actually been declining for a long time before the project, and some of their deepest declines were before the project was implemented. However, they've still continued to decline. So this is an area where we're going to be working hard to understand why they're declining and what kinds of pond habitat we need to provide for them in order for them to continue to at least maintain where they are now. One of the interesting things that he found in this report, that they found this past couple of years, is that the phalaropes are actually using ponds that are less saline than we expected. So we expected these birds to be using really high saline ponds, and that's not the case. So we'd like to understand that a little bit better as well. Next slide. Sediment, there's a lot on sediment. Everyone knows we're trying to support tidal marsh habitat, but we also want to make sure that we're not decreasing any existing habitats. So we've continued since the beginning of the project to study the habitat evolution within the project area. And then we've added a couple other studies that I'll describe each of these. An accretion rate study by Karen at USGS, and then some work from SFEI on lower South Bay suspended sediment. Next slide. Yeah, so a few slides from the work that Brian Fulfrost has been doing, and these are pretty self-explanatory. If you look in the top left-hand corner, this is an image of North Creek Marsh, and you can see over time between 29 to 2021 that we've been nicely establishing marsh in this area. First mudflat and then marsh vegetation. Next slide. Same with Pond A6, or the Duck's Head, as some people call it. Seems to be a little bit slower, but we are seeing marsh establish mudflat habitat and then marsh, tidal marsh with vegetation. Next slide. Yeah, keep going. And then Brian was, yeah, this is the one I wanted. Thank you. The interesting thing, this is the outside of north top of Pond A6. You know, we've talked a lot when the project started about Will Marsh's rob mudflats. In this particular instance, the marsh is actually prograding at the external part of Pond A6. So you can see in the top image, the mudflat where the yellow line is and the black line. And then if you look at that yellow line in the bottom, you can see that marsh is established in that area. So that's kind of a cool thing that Brian was able to see through his mapping. Next slide. Keep going. And then the other thing, I think it was, I don't remember who mentioned it earlier, the idea that marshes have been eroding on the east side of the bay. And this is an image of marsh edge erosion that Brian was able to capture between these two periods at Whale's Tail. And this is really cool because it also meshes with work that USGS has been doing, Jesse Lacey and Karen Thorne, to document some marsh edge erosion as part of some studies they're doing as part of the sediment work group for the RMP. So we're considering having Brian do some more of this work for the, around various other parts of the project, and we'll keep you posted on that.
And that's Whale's Tail at Eden Landing. Yeah.
Yes. And then Karen Thorne, as part of work that she had started, USGS had started at the refuge to characterize vegetation and marsh condition in light of sea level rise. We've contracted with her to do an accretion rate study that includes not only areas within the refuge, but some sites that are of interest to the project. So these are just the study parameters that she'll be using. Next slide. And these are the places where USGS has located sites, and in some of these areas also put in SETs to measure elevation change and accretion. Next slide. And just briefly, I just wanted to highlight for folks that I know you're aware that we commissioned that USGS did a mercury study as part of phase 1. And I just want to point you to our website where you can actually download the completed final report. Next slide. Same with water quality. I think I reported on this previously. We're still continuing to do O&M water quality monitoring as part of the project. We'll be doing some fish and water quality monitoring at Ravenswood as part of that restoration. And then we have been talking a bit with SFEI and nutrient management staff about thinking about how to measure, how to quantify water quality effects. Are there water quality effects from ponds out into the sloughs in the South Bay? Next slide. I think I'm getting there, Dave. Yeah, and then, you know, in our adaptive management plan, it mandates that we sort of adaptively manage the adaptive management plan, that we actually go in occasionally, periodically, and take a look at our adaptive management plan and decide whether, evaluate whether or not what we are doing at this particular time is actually appropriate, or whether we need to change some of our management or adaptive management strategy. So next slide. So we embarked this year on a refresh, not a wholesale change of the adaptive management plan, but really a look into the project, into the adaptive management big table, as well as the plan itself, and think about, look at our restoration targets. Are they still where we want to be? What are our triggers? Are we still monitoring the right things as part of our adaptive management plan? I think we've, over 20 years, we have a little better understanding of the science for the project and the management needs that we have. And that's given us an opportunity to go in and consider whether the management actions that were originally identified are what we need to do, or whether we need to change some of that. I think predators is one example of like how we know now that we have to put a much larger focus on predators. And so that's just an example of one of the things that we'll be adjusting. Next slide. And so the process for that is we are going line by line through that big table. Dave and I have taken first stabs at it, and then we're engaging the science team and the project management team to help with that. Making some suggested changes or recommendations, and then running them through the team and discussing those. And then the big focus for us really is thinking not only about science, but about management, and focus on the items that we really need to manage at this point in time and acquire funding for. I think that might be the last slide. Go ahead. So yeah.
Other than your beautiful balancing rocks.
Yeah, it's a continue. I want to emphasize that, you know, we are at this point in the project with tidal marshes and managed ponds and the needs of various species. And we really are in this place of having to manage, balance, you know, what we're going to need. And I think in the coming years, after phase 2, we'll really be taking a hard look at, you know, what we need to do, especially for some of these waterbird species. Next slide. I think that's my thank you slide. The next
that
slide.
Is it. Yeah, well,
I got there and as quick as I could, but
you did great.
Give you a lot of information.
You did
and
great.
I am available during the open house part, so for folks that need to stay.
Yeah, and we wanted to have a few minutes for questions, and I see Arthur's hand is up and Karen's too. I wonder if you all are available to stick around, and maybe we hold the questions until after Laura can do the funding update, and we can cover them then. Is that acceptable to you? I don't want to put you out if you're not available.
Well, it's not really for me, because I think the question I have is sort of the key one since I've been on.
Okay, well then go ahead, Arthur. We'll take just a minute or two, and then hopefully we can cover the other things later. Go ahead.
Because I've seen your priority species, but when we started this, PRBO was doing some of the studies about potential impacts of the stairway. What came out is that there could be a significant impact on, I think it was diving ducks and certain shorebirds that use the managed ponds. And I don't see them pulled out. You know, snowy plovers don't really represent a lot of shorebirds, and terns don't represent a lot of ducks. And so I'm not seeing those species or gills reflected, unless it's just migratory birds. And I'm a little concerned that they just get lumped in there, unless the science has come around and we're no longer that concerned about those gills. But wondering why
we're concerned about all of them, Arthur, but those aren't rising to the top right now as ones that we need to really be working on management for. They're doing pretty well. We do track those, both the shorebirds and the diving birds, as part of the surveys each year. Where we're really seeing the need to track right now is around the phalaropes and the avocet stills and terns, and what how we need to think about managing for them. But yeah, we are monitoring for all of those species, but they just aren't rising to the top right now as a
Right.
critical need.
And if I could, I understand about needing to monitor the species that are really being affected right now, but I guess my concern is just how, since we're still looking at the stairway and trying to figure out how much do we go from, into tidal marsh versus managed, how is that question fitting into the process also, or is that going to be waiting for the end of stage 2 and then you're going to be looking at it? And
I think it's more of the
finally,
latter. Dave can weigh in too, but we're thinking more at the end of stage 2, really looking at all of what we need and whether we're going to go any further up the staircase or whether we're going to need to think about managing ponds and how to provide the best habitat for birds.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just to clarify, Arthur, we're continuing to monitor everything. The priorities are more about like science types of trying to do some experiments about predation management or water management or things like that that can improve those numbers rather than just tracking and reporting.
Right.
The things that we haven't talked a lot about, it's generally because they're doing pretty well and they're on their way towards reaching those targets that we set for them. And so we are still tracking them, but they are not a priority to develop further studies on. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I just wanted to see
no,
how
it's a
we're
good,
fitting it in your mind.
No, good questions.
Great question.
And the last one is,
Okay.
if you're redoing your management guidelines and goals, are we going to get a chance to have a look at it and provide comments before you finalize it?
Of course, yes, very much so. We haven't really laid out exactly how all of this is going to play out yet. It depends on how sweeping some of those changes are, but we're at least trying to assess what changes are needed first, right? And then we will go from there. But certainly there will be a public process on any changes we make to that. I see a question from Brian Wines in the chat that I'd like to answer. What types of actions are being considered for predator management? Some of them are exclusion fencing for terrestrial predators. Some are, I wouldn't call them predator management so much as predation management. So things like habitat enhancements to increase camouflage or provide chick shelters. Those reduce the efficiency and the effectiveness of predation without directly, hazing some of the avian predators, but there is some of that goes on in some places as well. Tree or other structure removal in certain places where they don't belong is part of what we do. Like some of those old, if there's posts or a derelict crumbling fence that's still a good avian predator perch on the, sticking up in the middle of the dry salt pan, things like that, Brian. So I hope that answers some of those questions. And James Irvin has a nice comment about foresters tern nesting. Might have been influenced by the anchovies last year. Entirely possible. I don't know, but it certainly makes sense. We do want to cover, are there any other science questions? We do want to cover funding, and then we can maybe dig in on these more detailed science questions in the open house, if that's all right.
Yeah, I got a quick one.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I didn't see that hand there. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this proposed park on the water treatment lands, they're going to restore up to 800 acres, reclaim it from drying ponds. So we have a clean slate. So,
where are you speaking about?
It's the land that used to be buffer lands and sludge drying ponds around the Santa Clara San Jose wastewater treatment plant.
Okay.
It interfaces with pond A18.
Okay.
So there's an opportunity to create whatever kinds of habitat we want. Riparian upland. They proposed a pond from the treated water, the effluent. So it could be an opportunity for freshwater birds. And this division of state parks has got the highest requirements for environmental habitat monitoring enhancement. They've done a great job with snowy plovers on the beach down south. So maybe there could be some collaboration. They could learn what's, from this habitats and the officials or scientists.
Good to know. All right. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right. Chris Barr just put a link in the chat about our science program. I appreciate that. And we are going to move on to some funding updates from Laura Cholodenko of the State Coastal Conservancy. Go ahead.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thanks everybody for staying. I'll try to be quick. I'm Laura Cholodenko with the State Coastal Conservancy. Part of the PMT. I'm doing a lot of fund management for the project, and that includes trying to raise a lot of outside funding for all aspects of the project: planning, construction, science, etc. So as you can probably gather, this is an expensive endeavor to complete the restoration project and reach all of our goals. It's going to take in total probably hundreds of millions of dollars to fully implement this project. And so we need a lot of funding, and it's not possible for any one agency to fund the whole project. Fortunately, these days, there are unprecedented levels of funding for programs at different agencies that can support habitat restoration, which of course includes tidal wetland restoration. The information that's on the screen is from a recent webinar that was put on by the San Francisco Bay Joint Venture. They wanted to, let people know about these really impressive pots of funding that are available for restoration projects. So I'll just run through this really quickly. At the State Coastal Conservancy, we estimate having about 100 to 200 million over several years for San Francisco Bay. That's not just, the shoreline or the bay, that's for the entire region, but a lot of that funding can be applied to tidal wetland restoration work. Then at EPA, there's about 30 million this year for the San Francisco Bay Water Quality Improvement Fund. The San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority generally has about 25 million annually for multi-benefit shoreline habitat restoration projects. And then on the, again, nationally, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, has several pots of funding. On the screen, I've listed two that total almost 700 million, and that's nationally, that will fund habitat restoration and coastal resilience projects. So I think the takeaway for me is really this is a great time to get projects permitted and finished with design and get to implementation, because this isn't funding that will last forever. There will of course be lean times in the future, and I do also just want to point out that because these pots of funding are substantial, that the granting agencies are able to increase their caps on the amounts that can be granted to any one project. So, if you have a very expensive project to fund, like you'll see on the screen, a $30 million restoration project, it's great if you can get a big chunk of funding from through one grant. So we're working really hard to get the last of our phase 2 projects fully designed and permitted, and are actively raising funds for them. And that includes the Mountain View Ponds projects, Ponds A1 and A2W, and Southern Eden Landing. Mountain View is estimated for both A1 and A2W to cost somewhere around 15 to 18 million. We need to do a little more careful estimate down the road, but we currently have about $11 million in hand, which is going to be enough to complete the A2W project. And then hopefully we can get to fundraising for A1 maybe in 2024. For Southern Eden Landing, that's estimated to cost about 30 to 35 million. We have 16.5 million in hand. A lot of that is funding through the Coastal Conservancy, but then we were also really happy to recently get funding from a $4 million grant from US EPA for that project as well. So that's where we're at with construction, and I think you can go to the next slide. Science funding. Science is generally a little harder to get big pots of funding for. Most of the phase 2 funding has been through the Coastal Conservancy, but then we've also been we were lucky to get some funding through the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. There we have the column that says spent allocated is funding that that is for projects that have or studies or monitoring that has already been completed or is in process. And then we have about $900,000 that's remaining that can be put into to fund new studies. And we anticipate, I think, as Donna said, that we will do some water quality monitoring or studies. There will be more monitoring of birds, water birds, shorebirds, nesting birds, and hopefully some sediment accretion studies, as well as maybe another study with Brian Fullfrost to look at patterns of lateral marsh erosion in the South Bay or in the project area. And with that, I think that's all I have.
I think so too. Do you have any questions from the forum members on funding, needs, priorities, anything? I see Karen High's hand up.
Hi, I wanted to thank the Coastal Conservancy for all you've done to direct funds to the Salt Pond Restoration Project. It's clear that we could not have gotten to where we are without your support. So thank you very much. My question is directed, there's tremendous pots of funding for restoration, and there's, as you've indicated, some for doing science. My concern is as we promote 30 by 30 at the state and federal level and we acquire additional lands, that we're going to need O&M funds to make sure that these lands can be continued to be maintained. And is there any movement afoot to start increasing funding for that kind of need?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and it's something that we grapple with a lot. I know that the management at the Coastal Conservancy, makes annual visits to DC to push for more funding for O&M and all kinds of funding for all kinds of things. But that is really important. We want this work to be sustainable in the long term. So I think a lot of you out there do a lot of advocacy, and so I think we need to keep, beating that drum that these landowning agencies really need better funding for O&M. But yeah, I guess I don't have a great answer to that. I don't know of any other specific things. Yeah.
I mean, in the short term, one of the things that we're working on is trying to think about some of the things that might otherwise be categorized as O&M and instead make them about project adaptive management actions. So that sort of fits with the idea that Donna was just describing about those little sort of reassessment and updates of what we're doing on the AMP to try to figure out, well, which of these things are management actions? Because if there are management actions associated with the restoration project, we have a way to leverage that into the funding that the project goes after. Now, that's not going to be sufficient for everything, but it should help. In the longer term, things like writing to your Congress people, voting for water bonds, all these different kinds of things that can direct more money to these agencies directly and to increase sort of the overall availability of funds for these things is important. And I should note that a lot of this funding that's going on right now is for restoration, but it's kind of for restoration as part of sea level rise adaptation projects. And so those are great things to try to do multi-objective projects at once, but those are also complicated and cross more property boundaries and involve a broader set of constraints and objectives to meet than a pure restoration project would have to do on its own. And so there's some, that pathway is, I think, potentially fruitful, but not without brambles. So any other questions or comments on funding? Dean, I see your hand is still up, and I don't know if that's it seems like a legacy one. So I'm going to wrap it up.
Sorry, my hand was up. I tried to flash it.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any polluted areas that need to be cleaned up. There's EPA brownfield funding for that. Also,
not really.
No, okay. And then also for parks or parklets, there's CARB greening fund. And then for any parks or environmental stuff around wastewater treatment plants, there's a revolving fund that also has a greening.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's good information. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
And then any South Bay Shoreline Plan stakeholders, please stick around. I got a lot to say. Thanks.
Yeah. So this is not the perfect forum for that, Dean. We're going to focus the Q&A on the Salt Pond Restoration Project. So if there's not a lot of interest in those other things in our project, you can follow up to the extent of people's time. But I would suggest that you contact representatives of the South Bay Shoreline Project directly. So we're going to wrap up the official meeting. I'm going to thank everyone for their attendance and for your patience with us as we went just a little bit long. Our goals, in case you haven't figured it out, in the next couple of years, are to complete phase 2 at the refuge, initiate construction at Eden Landing, implement those science priority items, finishing the updates and the reevaluation of the AMP, getting that into a public review process, advancing the various partner and collaborative projects you heard about, and extending our partnerships for regional monitoring and science with the Bay RMP, the Wetlands Regional Monitoring Program, Nutrient Management Strategy, and others. And there are, of course, ways for you to get involved in volunteer efforts that Save the Bay or San Francisco Bird Observatory is doing. The Wildlife Refuge is increasing its sort of public outreach and education programs. And a lot of that stuff is on our website, and I encourage you to visit those and talk to those different entities. So stick around for more questions and answers. Thanks again for everybody's participation and preparation time on this, and for your attendance and good questions. Thank you. All right, we're adjourned. If I had a gavel, I would knock it. So let's talk. Who's got questions for follow-up?
Oh, I would just notice Nathan in the chat said SFBBO needs follow-up monitoring volunteers.
Excellent. Thank you, Nathan. That's a great one to mention. Yep.
With his contact.
And I believe you can even train people in that, right?
Yep, we can. It's pretty one of the easier ones for our monitoring work, since there's just the 2 species you need to distinguish. We go out every 2 weeks, and we'll be the more volunteers we get, the better coverage of the salt ponds we can do. So we can always use help.
And I just want to call out Nathan for really digging into the phalaropes and really trying to help us understand what's happening with those species. So thanks, Nathan.
Yeah, and yeah, there's your email address in the chat. That's great. And so let's see. Karen's hand is up again, or maybe still. I'm not sure if you got something new, Karen.
Karen, you're on mute.
I'd be willing to let somebody else go. I do have 4 questions, but I've asked a lot of questions. So if there's somebody else, they can go first.
Well, that's very kind of you. All right, we'll see if anyone else wants to jump the line here.
That's Jim.
Jim, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, is that me? Yeah, question maybe more directed at Donna, but for anybody, as far as the stilts and avocets, do you include New Chicago Marsh as part of your monitoring for stilt and avocet nests?
I believe they do. Rachel, you may be able to jump in on this, but
Yes.
yeah, they do a larger survey than just the SF2 and A16.
Okay, yeah, because New Chicago, when I go by there, I can see around June, July timeframe, there's a lot of stilts and avocets.
Yeah, those numbers do include those do include New Chicago.
Yeah, and then the other one, which you probably, I'm sure you don't monitor, and it kind of comes up tangentially from comments that were made by Dean Stanford, but the San Jose, Santa Clara sludge lagoons are a hot spot for stilt and avocet nests. And, before a lot more progress goes, maybe you could seek an invitation from the plant to take a look at what's going on out there. As they manage their sludge lagoons, it's on a 4-year cycle, and I'm disclosing insider information because I retired there 5 years ago. But yeah, on the 4th or 5th year of their sludge, when it becomes very sludgy, very thick and sludgy, and it grows thick plants, stilts and avocets are all over that thing, building nests, which then strongly recommends what direction maybe restoration might want to go if you like stilts and avocets. If you don't, then you might want to do something else with that property. And I don't want to make offers for what they should do, but I would suggest that during this summer nesting season or at sometime soon, you get a couple of Stilton Avocet nest counting people, and just go take a look. If nothing else, you can get a really strong sense of what stilts and avocets look for when they go nest. So anyway, that's it.
Thanks for that, Jim. Thanks. We'll
Very
discuss
handy
that
indeed.
internally.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Karen.
Okay, my questions, I have 3 directed at Donna and 1 to the group at large, the PMT. Donna, on the American avocets and blacknet stilts, is the predominant predation by avian predators like California gull and things of that? Okay. And so yeah, I'll let that go. On the phalaropes, Nathan, is your study public? And if so, can we get a link to that? I'm really interested in your conclusions. And then, have we looked at comparative rates of decline in other areas of the Pacific Flyway to see if they're more precipitous or if they're on the same level as the decline we're seeing in the Bay Area?
So I can jump on that, and if Nathan's still on, I'll invite him to jump in and add more too. Yeah, there have been huge declines on the flyway for phalaropes in particular, particularly Mono Lake, and the declines here, I don't know if I mentioned it or not. I was trying to go through the slide so fast. The declines mostly happened in the 70s and 80s here with phalaropes, but we're still seeing declines since the project implemented. But the biggest declines were prior to the project. And if Nathan's on, I'll invite him. I don't know if he's still on.
Yep,
to add.
I'm still here.
Yeah, go ahead and add any thoughts you have.
Yeah, so the phalaropes, yeah, we did for that species compare the trends inside of San Francisco Bay and outside using both the sparse number of scientific surveys, there haven't been a ton, as well as using supplementing that with community science data from eBird. And both of those tell a pretty similar story, which is that there is a major decline that happened sometime between the 80s and the 2000s when we started our monitoring, where there was a decline of something from on the order of like 40,000 in San Francisco Bay over to, a few thousand at the start of the project. So that was the major decline, but it has continued, as Donna said. The drivers of that are not exactly sure. The phalaropes are declining kind of everywhere due to a variety of factors. Saline lakes have also been drying up. Great Salt Lake was in crisis before we had this very wet winter. But the decline, especially this historic decline before the start of the project in San Francisco, was much more severe than elsewhere. So we're still, kind of the next phase is trying to figure out why that might have happened now that we've detected the trends, because it's not particularly clear, given that there isn't any obvious management change that might have affected the birds during those 20 years between the 80s and the 2000s.
Is there a lot of, are there a lot of banding studies so that we can determine how much of, what percentage of birds are returning to the Bay Area?
No, we don't know that. We're interested in, if we can, getting some banded birds and MODIS tagged and detecting movements between Mono Lake and the Bay Area with MODIS tagged birds on the towers, but we don't have that information right now, really.
And I think I mentioned this, but we have contributed to the installation of some MODIS towers that are within project areas. And so we're hoping that we'll be able to detect that movement too. Once we have we have to get birds banded too in order to make that happen.
Okay. And Nathan, are your studies on the South Bay Salt Pond website, or is there a way to access that?
I don't think they are yet. We can put them up on the San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory website.
Okay. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's where most of our reports live.
Unless Ariel's posted them recently, they're not up yet. We just got them fairly recently from SFBBO, and I haven't. We've been busy. We haven't done that post. We'll get them out to you soon. No, they're good. They're good studies, and
they are final, so we can post them. Yeah.
We just haven't gotten to it yet.
Okay, and my last question may be a little off the wall, but I know that for a while, Patty Oikawa from Cal State East Bay was doing carbon capture studies and looking at the rates of methane release at Eden Landing. Are you looking to partner to continue those kinds of studies? Because increasingly I'm seeing a lot of money directed towards blue carbon, and that might be another source of funding for the project.
Yeah, I think,
idea.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave. Yeah, there's
No,
a lot
please.
of interest in blue carbon in particular, and we've done I've been part of some studies at SFEI and the Delta. I think some of those same scientists are turning their eye towards the Bay. I'm familiar with Patty's study, so it's just like finding the right, I'm trying to think of the word I want to use, but making sure that it's like applicable to what we're doing, right? At this point in time, a lot of our ponds are still not very, still just water in some places, and we're starting to get some marsh. So yeah, we're looking at that. And I know that some people have expressed interest in Eden Landing again. I don't know if John's familiar with that, or Carly, but I've seen a few proposals out there that are talking about some Bay Area carbon studies. So
I can chime in real quick and just note that we did submit a grant to do some remote sensing based blue carbon estimation for the Salt Pond project with Irina Dranova from UC Berkeley. So it is definitely on our radar.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
See, it wasn't
All
off
right.
the wall at all, Karen.
No, right on point. Yeah. And we get a lot of requests from a lot of from a lot of outside researchers looking to do studies on one part or the other of either Eden Landing or the Don Edwards Refuge, and wherever it's applicable and could be beneficial, we try very hard to work with them to get the special use permits and do the access planning and make sure that they can do that study without adversely affecting either the habitat or the wildlife there. I mean, it takes a fair bit of planning, and we're generally able to accommodate that, but they're not always things that we can directly fund, but we can certainly provide the space and the help, So
I would like to, since I have a little forum here, I would like to add a little bit about the fish synthesis that I wasn't
that's a
able
great
to
one. Yeah,
wasn't able
please.
to really cover in the talk. So all of you know that there was a lot of monitoring for fish done in the lower South Bay early in the project, and continues as part of the work that Jim Irvin is involved in with Levi Lewis in his lab. So we've just recently contracted with Levi to look at, to actually develop a synthesis of all the data that he's aware of and the fish studies and the data that he has, to really kind of look at what's happening with fish in relation to the project in particular, not just not the South Bay, but really what's happening with regard to the project. And the cool thing about that is Levi's been heavily involved with the WRMP and working on issues related to fish as part of that project. And so he prior to us contracting with him, built a huge database of a lot of fish data and the locations and how it's been sampled. So he's really going to be able to hopefully provide us with some cool information about fish related to the project.
Nice. All right. Other questions on the restoration project, on the science program, on adaptive management, on phase 2 at Eden Landing or the refuge? Not seeing anything. All right, then, Dean Stanford, you may have some more things to ask about. Now's a good moment.
Yeah, thanks. I want to get too off track. But this park project, when it was proposed back in 2009, at first, it included the trail around Pond 18 to be included in the park. And as I said in the chat earlier, it was not part of the shoreline plan, and because it's not owned by it, the document said it was not part of the study, et cetera, et cetera. And I attended a BCDC meeting, I think like 2018, and I brought up that I think there's insufficient mitigation for losing that wonderful 9-mile trail on the ponds out of Alviso Marina County Park. I've spoke to park users. I've gone to many, I used to live in Alviso. I've gone to many of the Alviso community meetings, and they're not happy about losing. They said they don't listen to us. So I propose maintaining the trail around Pond 18, is for their mitigation. So their mitigation was building a bridge to connect the Bay Trail, which is great. But then it's a trail between a sewer plant and active garbage dump. And then another like paved bike trail along Highway 237. I don't think that equals 9 miles of that getting way out in nature's. So what I just heard about, there's funding to restore Pond 18. That probably means they're ready to go ahead and destroy the levee. But I'd like to see breached and bridged as that other project we were talking about, and maintain that. I'm not asking for water district or anybody to do any funding to maintain the trail or habitat or anything. That, in fact, I'd like to see the pond sold while maintaining an easement all the way around the levee that state parks could purchase or maintain by Santa Clara, San Jose, and then breach the levees in a manner that could be bridged later, and create the park trail. It's a very important part of the park. The park is going to have miles of paved or compacted multi-use trails for hiking and biking, and then kind of like onion skin dirt trails for e-bikes, electric recreational vehicles, mountain bikes, and whatever, hiking, bird watching, all that stuff. And I'd really like to see this happen as proposed. Like I said, I went to the VCDC. There's a presentation of the shoreline plan, and I brought this subject up, and one of the commissioners said, yes, we'd like to see more info on the trails. And I don't think it's ever, they said next time, the stakeholders said next time, but I don't think it's ever happened that they've gone back before the BCDC on the recreational trails. And it's part of their mandate to foster access and recreation. And plan on providing small electric vehicles to get elderly and disabled out on the bay. And one last point concerning the Bay Trail going through there, I think they're violating the act, because the act says to prioritize connecting existing facilities. And then in the plan, it says we're going to leave the levee gravel. This would have the added benefit of reducing potential numbers of people who might use the refuge trail, which is the Bay Trail, to connect between the existing Coyote Creek section of the Bay Trail, east of the study, and Sunnyvale section of the Bay Trail, west of the study, for purposes other than refuge visitation. So they want people to go up to Highway 237 and then around out back into Alviso instead of going on the Bay Trail.
Okay.
So
I think you've described I don't want to cut you off. I think you've described your interests and your concerns very well. And I see that Neil Hedgecock has taken himself back onto camera and perhaps can address some of them. And again, your questions about the South Bay Shoreline Project or about a city county property are not necessarily germane to the Salt Pond Restoration Project, but we are trying to provide a forum for these overlapping projects. So we can answer that here to the extent we can. So go ahead, Neil.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. And appreciating your concerns. We do not have plans to restore Pond A18 in a way that would allow the bridges that you're describing. That would be above and beyond what was the plan authorized by Congress. And so you're correct in the description of how we intend to restore Pond A18. And so I don't think I have a lot to offer there beyond just kind of reiterating that that's how we intend to implement the project out there. And
I understand, but every plan should have a way to modify it. Like they're talking about the other plans earlier, that they're built-in modification things. So this would be what do you call it? The unexpected change authorization for the
plan that went through our
froze up.
Yeah, he did. Neil, is anyone else frozen, or is it just Neil? No, okay. We'll see what happens there.
So there's a mechanism to change the plan, and then a supplemental EIR. So there's ways to change it. I've been meeting with I got a letter from Rokana on this issue also to the to the wildlife, U.S. Wildlife, and they responded. They disavowed their purview over the land and deal with San Jose. But once the pond is sold, it's back into the stakeholders. And so I don't know, I'm trying to save this damn trail. So yeah, I've been meeting with Rokana's office, and I'd like to see if we can get more funding. So I'm going to advocate to get funding to maybe move up those A4 through A15. But you guys got to save the trails. Otherwise, I'm not going to try too hard.
Well, we have we've tried to explain all along, Dean, that all of these projects, right, whether it's Shoreline Project, Safer Bay, South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, they are all balancing, right? They're all balancing restoration and flood protection, restoration and public access and flood protection, different kinds of public access, paved or unpaved trails, something that is very, very, very low impact so that people can view wildlife versus something that might be a motorbike park. Like, they're on and on and on. These balances and these compromises need to be made. Sea level rise is a humongous constraint along everything along the bayshore. That even keeping the few managed ponds that we are able to keep alongside the bayshore is going to become exponentially more difficult and more expensive over time as sea levels rise. It is going to be harder and harder to maintain those. I don't want to editorialize too much. I do want to caution you against expecting any long-term trail on the outer edge of the bay, because it is going to be extremely difficult to retain it for anything other than like natural wave, energy dominated environment. So like, just, I don't want to speak for anybody else's project, but we're trying to do most of our managed ponds set back and have marsh on the outer edge of them, because those outer levees are harder to do. So, we just have to be careful to balance all these different goals across all the different constraints.
Yeah, I understand that. I think the shoreline plan is unbalanced.
Okay, well, I appreciate your opinion on that. This is not the same project. So we're, and I've heard you make that case at meetings on that project and BCDC meetings too. So you were certainly getting heard, and I think it's good that there's an involved public advocating for a particular point of view, So I do want to note the comment from Ellen Jonk here. Ellen did some work on identifying cultural resources at Eden Landing, the interpretive site there. Was excellent update today on the oh yes, south of Eden Landing in Union City and elsewhere. No, Ellen, we didn't do any cultural resource surveys outside of Eden Landing. We did update the old ones that were inside of Southern Eden Landing to include a couple of features that had not been previously identified, and we'll be adding some some recordation and some of the public access features that Carly talked about, the viewing areas and things. We'll be providing that information and a viewpoint of one of them. So
great. Thank you.
Great question. It's good to see you, Ellen. You're looking well. Yeah. Thanks for listening in as much as you could. Shalini has to run. It's 12:42. People are beginning to leak out for other meetings. Are we done with everything else?
I think Pat Showalter had a question about funding and how to advocate for funding. And I think that was in response to Karen's questions about funding for O&M. I was just trying to type something into the chat in response to that. I don't know if anybody else has any good answers to it, but I think about advocacy with elected officials who are, working on state budgets and, budgets for different agencies. Of course, that's always beneficial. And, when we're talking about restoration projects with constituents, with reporters, with anybody, we should sort of highlight the need for long-term management of these lands as well. You know, we need a lot of funding for restoration, but we also need funding for these agencies to continue to manage these properties. So getting the word out there however you can. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on that.
That's an excellent point.
Well, it would be remiss of me not to thank all the community organizations that, you know, a number of them go back to DC and do a fly-in event and talk about all the great restoration going on across the bay, whether it's federal lands or not. And I think that community engagement and that community voice has been really strong. And I just want to say thank you to all those who participated today. It's very much valued. Of course, as a federal agency working under the executive branch, we follow the president's green book, and the Congress holds the purse strings on how that shakes out in the role. So we from a level recognize the challenges that come with, you know, a rising sea and assets along the bay, in trying to achieve all our shared goals together. So I just want to thank the community for your continued voice, and for all those who organize and go back and share the success stories to date with others. So thank you all.
Hear, hear. I second that, Chris. Thanks. Any remaining comments or questions or notes of interest? Thumbs up from Alan. Thanks so much. Jim Irvin, we are going to work on, as you can tell, we've had a couple of public meetings going on lately. We're going to work on your blog, your guest blog post for the website. So look for something from Ariel on that. I appreciate you doing so much work up front on that. Eric, thank you for yours a year or two ago now on that cleanup. It was great. And if anyone else wants to submit a guest post for Salty Dave's Wetland Weblog, easy for me to say, please do. I am open to contributing authors and bloggers. So,
yeah, one quick question: is this going to be the recording going to be emailed out? The link to the recording?
Yes, it will be available on the website. Probably takes about a week, Ariel said in one of the earlier chat questions, to get it through all the processing and get it uploaded onto YouTube, and then we'll post a link to it so you can download it or view it directly.
And I think we'll most likely wait until we get the meeting summary up as well, and then send out that as one email announcement. So we
Right. So the summary is like
people's boxes.
Right. So the summary is the notes that we'll compile and put together. So maybe that takes a couple of weeks, but yeah, it will be out.
Great. Thanks. I learned a lot, and thanks for listening to my ranting.
For sure. Thanks for coming. And thanks again to my colleagues, to the forum membership for your continued interest and participation. I appreciate it. And to all of the guests and everybody else, thanks again. Have a terrific afternoon.